are live, ladies and gentlemen, live from the apartment of myself, Kevin Rosmertz. Me and Oliver here. We're going to talk about some movies. What would you like to say, Oliver? This is our first podcast, by the way.
This is the first one. We're going to see how this goes. Might be a little bit rough around the edges, but, I think we're going to look back and this will be a momentous moment.
Yeah, Oliver and I just always have these conversations when we're like, hey, let's record one of these sometime. So, we're both big fans of Halloween season, and getting into the month of October here, we thought, why don't we just record some sort of an episode? Because we love movies, we love Halloween, and we wanted to do a podcast. We were like, why don't we do a short series leading up to Halloween for people to, build that excitement of the holiday Halloween spirit, and we can talk about some movies, horror films, Halloween themed movies, and get it going. And
seems like we've chosen the first subgenre we were thinking to do the first show on is the ever so classic slasher genre, which I don't know. It's actually interesting. Like a lot of horror fans. Depending on the age that you ask them, a lot of people actually have issues with the slasher genre. It's almost like one of the lesser respected genres, I find.
I could kind of see that. It's like people don't really take them seriously, but they are so classic. And for the sake of Halloween, I just figure, okay, well, for starters, you have the movie Halloween, which is perhaps the quintessential slasher film. It's for Halloween themed kind of stuff. I always sort of associated the holiday to those classic characters and those movies. The horror of this sort of fantastical yet realistic serial killer kind of theme that's going on in those slashers.
Yeah. It's funny. I almost have two categories when it comes to sort of like horror monsters. And there's first the kind of classic universal monsters that we kind of always grow up with as kids, Wolfman, Frankenstein, Mummy, all of those.
Oh, yeah.
And then I always think of this sort of second generation of characters that are almost only now in the last maybe few decades are really becoming cemented as this kind of like group of next generation monsters. And they're really the slasher characters. It would be, Mike Myers, Jason,
Freddy Krueger, Myers,
Freddy, Leatherface, Pinhead. And even though unlike the Universal movies, which were all the same studio, they would even start showing up in each other's films. Really with the slashers, they were mostly made by different studios. And other than maybe like Jason versus Freddy, or I guess Freddy versus Jason, they didn't really show up in each other's, franchises, but we always kind of lump them all together. These kind of
they're almost like the Avengers of the slasher genre.
Yeah.
You put them together in a picture, and you're like, "Yep, that makes sense."
Well, and I don't know if it was just because of my parents not being the biggest fans. My mom really liked old horror, but she wasn't as crazy about what was modern horror at the time, which I guess was more like 80s, 90s horror. She was into the more classy stuff, and that was still the time where I think where a lot of parents, would not let their kids maybe watch Freddy Krueger or Jason. They were still kind of thought
I know I was not allowed to watch any of that stuff.
They were still thought of as these like really violent, legitimate horror movies. But I feel at this point now, they really almost have become the equivalent of like Frankenstein and the Mummy. Like they've been referenced so much and have been in our pop culture for so long now that I almost feel like you can almost show at least some kids those movies and they might actually not be all that scared by them.
Yeah, well, isn't that cool to see like the evolution of that, of what becomes a permanent fixture in the culture, the cultural zeitgeist, if you will. And in fact, even now, I was going to say, we're starting to see that happen with the Scream character too, because he's become such an icon.
That's right.
And it's like when that stuff is coming out, you don't know what's gonna be around for 20, 30 years. But that character, I mean, they're still making those movies. I don't know when the last one came out, a few years ago.
Actually, I think one just came out this year. I think.
Oh, really?
I think there was a new Scream movie this year. I think it was like
wow.
Scream. I might be. Maybe you're right. Maybe it was last year. Maybe.
Yeah, no, you're probably right. There probably was one fairly recently, but or there was like a limited series or something. I don't know.
We got that. Yeah, there was a TV show. I'm completely out of the loop with that one. I don't know how far you got. I actually only saw the first 3 Scream movies.
Yeah, same.
But I remember the neat thing about Scream, we're probably going to jump around a whole bunch of slasher movies. So, we might not do this all in order, but I remember the unique thing about when Scream came out, that was like the perfect time when me and all of my friends were starting to just get into horror movies and watching a bunch of them. We'd have sleepovers and we'd watch like, 2 kind of classic horror movies.
Yeah.
So it was really exciting when Scream came around because it was like the perfect timing because it was this movie that was starting to just reference all of these other older classic movies that we were watching. And I remember when it came out, I was thinking like, even when that first movie came out, I'm like, this Ghostface killer, like this is bound to become part of the collection of iconic slasher movies. I kind of, the movie was a hit so early. I was like, well, it's bound to get a sequel. And if it gets another movie after that, it's like, this will just become another kind of character in the slasher series. So it was kind of neat, like seeing almost like the birth of a slasher character because everyone else, all those other guys kind of came out kind of before I was born. So
yeah, totally. And especially when you can see that it is going to stick around for a while. I tend to think usually it's kind of hard to tell what's going to, find a permanent place in people's memories. But he is such an icon, and there's you can usually recognize an icon when you see it, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's like one of these horror movie icons or like, I don't know, Elvis Presley, Marilyn Monroe, Michael Jackson, people like that. Like there's a visual thing where you're like, that is iconic, and it's bound to stick around for a while.
Yeah, and I don't know what it was about. Especially, it seems, the 70s and 80s. I don't know, maybe that's just me because those are kind of probably my favorite decades of horror. But man, there was a lot of iconic characters that kind of came out of that era.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should start with that. We'll talk about them a little bit. Because one of the things we wanted to get into in this episode was talking about the real iconic sort of mainstream Halloween slasher films versus some of the ones that have been forgotten and sidelined and that didn't find a place in history to the same extent, and kind of analyze like, why is that? Why were some of these so successful, and why are some of them so ingrained in our memory and in our brains, whereas some of them just kind of dropped off? Because there's a number that I really loved, but they, like, nobody talks about them anymore.
So there's you mean a particular character or movie that?
Oh yeah, like slasher films, where I'm like, so for instance, one of the first slasher films that I saw, well, going back to what you were talking about with Scream, like you were the perfect age where those movies were coming out and you were just getting into those. I was aware of those when they were coming out, but I didn't get to see them until quite a few years later, because I think Scream came out in 95 or 96 or something.
Yeah, I think it was like late 96, and I actually remember that was like one of the last few times where I couldn't go see it because it was a rated R movie.
Yeah.
And I was technically still young enough that I needed someone, I guess, to go with, weirdly enough. So I remember like watching, I remember a few of my friends, I had a couple of friends who just looked older than me, and I think they just somehow either got in or maybe their parents went with them. So they saw it in theaters. And I remember it was just like months of, me making sure they didn't spoil the ending of who the killers were. But I must have watched the movie way later on VHS.
Yeah. Well, that was definitely the case for me too, because I, as I say, I was aware of those movies, but I wasn't allowed to go see them. I was like probably like 7 years old at the time. And I wanted to see them. I don't know. I had a bit of an attraction to that sort of thing. I especially remember when Sleepy Hollow came out, Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow. I was just like, oh, I want to see this so bad. And then it was years before I finally got to see it again. And
Oh, okay.
and when I actually did see it, it was like my parents were out of town and my brothers and I walked down to the video store and rented it. And it was like, okay, nobody's allowed to know that we let you watch this kind of thing.
Yeah. And again, I don't know if it was me being at the right age, but man, like Sleepy Hollow, that was a great movie in the theater. I remember seeing it in theaters, and there was things about it in the theater where I was just like, in some ways, it's almost like, it's not, Sleepy Hollow is not that scary, but it actually in some ways might even be the closest thing to like a bona fide Tim Burton horror movie.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, he's done a lot of his stuff is like creepy and spooky, but now that I'm thinking about it, Sleepy Hollow is probably his closest thing to an actual horror movie.
Yeah, well,
it's a slasher movie in many ways.
Either Sleepy Hollow or Sweeney Todd, right? Like both of those are very horror-ish. Although Sweeney Todd's also a musical and somewhat a comedy. That's an interesting thing. But I guess just to try and stay on topic, so I didn't get to watch a bunch of these movies until quite a few years later. And I remember there was a number of them that were coming out around the same time. Scream was one of them. I Know What You Did Last Summer was one of them. The Blair Witch Project was one of them. And these were all these movies that were kind of building up in this list in the back of my mind of like, I'm going to watch these eventually. And eventually I did get to watch them, but probably one of the first slasher films that I actually watched was this movie called Valentine.
Oh, okay.
Did you ever see that? That was like this. There was this killer with a Cupid mask.
So I remember when it came out.
It was shot here in Vancouver. Actually,
know, there's a lot. I don't know if it's Canada in general, but yeah, Vancouver. They do a lot. They do a lot of horror movies in Vancouver. So it doesn't surprise me that Valentine was done out here. I haven't seen it. My sister's been encouraging me to check that one out. It was kind of, to me, Valentine represented almost like the last death rattle of this kind of 90s era of slashers, because I can't honestly even really remember many after Valentine, and it almost seemed like Valentine was almost kind of one of the last ones.
Yeah, of that classic kind of slasher genre. Well, it's interesting because, yeah, the 90s slasher films are a little bit different from the 70s, 80s slasher films. They're like a little bit of an evolution on that. But they're still connected. But I do think you're right, like that you don't really get a lot of those anymore these days. I'm trying to think of what they would have been from the last.
Yeah.
It was like,
well, I guess I should say before we go any further, I've got a bit of a love-hate relationship with Scream in particular, since we're kind of on that topic, and it kind of it kind of laid the way for this kind of late 90s slasher thing. I mean, and the thing was, do you mean
Scream as a franchise or the movie, the first movie?
Well, even the first, I think Scream was a very important movie, not just in the slasher genre, but the horror genre. So I'm happy. I think I still enjoy the first Scream movie. It's the influence that movie had on most of these slasher movies that followed up. Some of them aren't even slasher movies, but even some of the sort of supernatural horror movies kind of started taking a stylistic influence from Scream, which was this kind of it's kind of this cookie cutter CW kind of polished style where it's almost kind of horror movies made for people who don't like horror movies or are scared too easily. And again, when I was a kid, I loved these movies. I thought Kevin Williamson was this genius who was writing this like great dialogue. You know, he did Scream and he did I Know What You Did Last Summer. And I was watching a bunch of these and I was enjoying them. But with each movie, I was kind of recognizing the same kind of style. What is it? It was a combination of they almost were more like murder mysteries. They were kind of more like whodunits than they were really horror movies in a lot of ways. And I didn't really feel that these were movies that were made for horror fans as much as these were kind of became the new kind of date movies where just, you know, normal couples would maybe just kind of go and take each other to, you know, one of these late 90s slashers.
Yeah, for a few cheap thrills or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. And so I do like Scream, but I do feel like, yeah, like it kind of, you know, with each of the Scream sequels, it started to kind of become more and more of this kind of paint by numbers thing. Actually, one of the movies from this era that I think kind of doesn't get enough love is a movie from the late 90s called Urban Legend.
Oh, I don't think I've seen that.
Well, I think you would really enjoy it because...
Well, see, this is great that you're bringing that up because this is probably one of these movies that's been a little bit forgotten, right?
Well, the reason why I think you would enjoy this is because a person who, an actor who was, I think, one of his kind of breakthrough roles in his career was in this, and I know you're a fan of his. We both are. But it was Urban Legend that was my introduction to Michael Rosenbaum.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. And he's like kind of like the highlight. He
Shout out to the Inside of You podcast.
Yeah, no, he kind of plays like the urban legend expert in the cast. So, I don't know if you remember Randy from Scream, who's kind of the horror movie fanatic. Michael Rosenbaum's kind of the Randy of urban legend folklore in that movie. And
gotcha.
yeah, no, and it's, it was a little bit close to home. It was.
I'm just going to say it now. We'll have to see if we can get Rosenbaum on our podcast.
Episode 2. That's how quickly this is going to take off, guys. We're going to have Rosenbaum on, and he'll tell us all about it. Actually, funny enough, I do have a friend of mine who has a very small role in Urban Legends.
Oh, is that right? Hey?
Yeah, small world.
Well, fuck, we could get him.
We definitely can get him. Okay, episode 2, we will get him. But yeah, no, and the neat thing about that movie is it's actually got a bunch of horror movie cameos. Robert Englund, who plays Freddy Krueger, is the university professor.
He seems to like doing some of these cameos, hey? Because obviously he was in Stranger Things recently. Fuck, I saw him in something else.
He's in tons of stuff. It's I really think if you're an actor and you're trying to consider, a specific genre to maybe stick with, there's nothing more loyal than the horror fan base. Whether you're a scream queen or
isn't that interesting that like these people are into all this dark stuff? Because I feel like the metal genre is kind of that way too.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
The metal genre has this sort of loyal following, and then it's also with the horror films and stuff. It's like people who are into dark. Is it because misery loves company? I don't know.
See, the funny thing is too, is like, of a lot of these, like a lot of like the metalheads I know, or goths, or people who are just really into horror, they all kind of seem to be sweethearts once you get to know them. It's kind of almost like they have these very healthy outlets for that dark stuff. Yeah. And it kind of somehow manages to allow them to keep having like a good sense of humor about things. But I don't really find a lot of these people to be particularly like dark. I mean, I myself am really into this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't really feel like it has that much of an effect on your personality. It's just kind of weird kind of like interests and I don't know, being connected to your your shadow side,
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's a good thing. It's like maybe it makes you a more compassionate person or a more sympathetic person.
Mm-hmm. I've heard it's way more worrisome to focus on the people who create like Disney animations and all like the fluffy fun stuff, and you got to wonder what their outlet is, if they don't have one.
That's kind of ironic though, isn't it?
Yeah, you'd think it would be the other way around, but
yeah, you would.
A lot of people think David Lynch is a super weird guy, and I think he is. But he also seems like one of like the sweetest, nicest guys out there too. So, I don't know what to say. I think it's just I don't know. Yeah, you need to have it. I think we all have our dark sides, and I think it's just a lot healthier if you're kind of like aware of it, and if you can kind of, I don't know. My dad wasn't really big into horror movies, but I don't think he understood that it's kind of it's like this safe outlet. It's kind of like a roller coaster ride. You're gonna have some thrills and chills, but really at the end of it all, like it really can't hurt you. I mean, I don't know, maybe psychologically there could be a bit of scarring there, but look at me, I turned out fine.
Yeah, I don't know by whose standard. But I do actually think there's something to be said for what you're saying, like being aware of your dark side or your dark inclinations or whatever.
Or at the very least the dark side of humanity itself that you live in, right? And just being aware that there are bad things that happen sometimes.
Yeah, there was something else that you said there that I was wanting to touch upon too, but
well, just taking it back to the slasher genre, the thing that's really interesting about this topic is that I almost find that there's two camps of people, as far as what they find scary. They're the people who find the sort of supernatural elements of horror movies very frightening. And then there's the other people who, well, frankly, just don't believe in any of the supernatural stuff. So just none of that really, they can't take it seriously. Mm-hmm. But then something like a slasher movie is actually a lot more terrifying them because it's a much more believable, realistic thing that
right.
to a degree does happen from time to time.
Well, isn't it interesting that when you say watch these true crime documentaries and it's like they discovered her body murdered in the house and they're showing like you don't know who's done it yet. You're just picturing this absolute monster, this terrifying phantom, essentially. Mm-hmm. But then when you find out near the end of the show, it's like, then it turned out to be this guy, the neighbor, and he's just like some random person. It's kind of like, oh, okay. Like it doesn't live up to the, I don't know, scary thing you kind of envisioned in your mind.
Yeah, well, and it's because my parents they really love those murder mysteries, and they're like the sort of the murder mysteries and thrillers. They're like a cousin to the horror genre, but they are different because the thing I think that my parents loved about, especially they used to watch a lot of British murder mystery shows, is it's more like a puzzle. It's a problem-solving thing. Like your brain is constantly trying to actually just figure out, like, what was the motivation and who did it. Yeah. And that's really not the point. There are some slasher movies. I mean, again, there's Scream, which is in some ways why Scream really is more, in a lot of ways, like just a gorier murder mystery, whodunit. But yeah, usually with horror movies, I mean, flat out, you usually know who the killer is right from the get-go. It's not about solving it. It's almost more about...
yeah, well, it's like, well, okay, we know that it's Mike Myers or Michael Myers, but I mean, the fact that he doesn't really have an identity, like there is something to be said for this scary factor of a guy who's wearing a mask where you can't see their own humanity, right? That makes it scarier.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, like I think the problem that a lot of people have with the Halloween franchise is that when they expanded it, the only thing that they could really do was to tell you more about Michael Myers. And the more that they did that, the less scarier Michael Myers as an idea became.
Yeah. It's like the backstory makes it... it kind of takes away from the horror element.
A lot of people think so, and I agree, because once you start giving someone like Michael Myers a motivation, then he's more methodical as opposed to what was originally just this kind of like mysterious, unstoppable force of nature. You didn't really know what he was doing or why he was doing it. You just knew he was doing it, and he was almost supposed to be like almost like the personification of evil itself. And then as you get later into the franchise, I mean, I don't know how many of the Halloween movies you've seen, but I mean, by the time they get like deep into like, movie like 5 and 6, you find out that there's like this pagan cult that's controlling him, and that this is like a continuous thing that happens over time. And it just gets so convoluted, and they were making it up as they went along. And then every now and then they just kind of have to they kind of scrap the franchise and try to almost like restart it. And so, yeah, he becomes less and less scary over time, because I guess you just get to know him more, and you just have a better understanding of things. But the mystery of what Michael Myers is, just kind of dilutes more and more. So it's like a lot of times I almost try to just, when I think of Halloween, I kind of try and just think of like that first movie, and almost kind of try and pretend that none of the other ones exist in a way.
Yeah. Maybe like the first 2 or 3 are kind of the classic ones, because I seem to recall those first few being pretty good. Yeah. And they're a little repetitive, as I recall, but you kind of like, okay, I do want to see more of this guy just terrorizing teenagers or whatever. Yeah.
The second one's actually like the second one's the closest in tone to the first one. I mean, it happens on the same night. And it's a fine way to kind of end it all, really. I think at the time the second one was meant to be the last one. And I mean, I even made a fan edit where I spliced those first 2 movies together, because you can just do it so easily. And yeah, I don't know. It was hard. I mean, actually, the third movie isn't even a Michael Myers movie. They tried to completely retool the franchise, and that didn't work out. So then they brought Michael Myers back for number 4.
Oh, okay, interesting.
But
maybe I didn't see the third one then. I don't know. I'm trying to remember.
The third one, it's again, it's another kind of like pagan cult thing where they're breaking off little chunks of what is it? Stonehenge, and they're putting these little chips of Stonehenge in Halloween masks that they give to children. And when the children watch these Halloween commercials, they basically die from these masks that they're wearing in horrific ways. Really different movie.
Wow.
But
yeah.
but that was the idea, was they were going to make, the idea was that every Halloween movie from then on was going to just be a complete standalone story that took place on Halloween night. And
that's kind of an interesting concept, but I think it's like, it's weird after you've already established the same character after 2 movies. Now people are sort of expecting it to be a consistent thing.
Yeah, you really would have had to have done that technique with the second film.
Yeah.
And then it would have been fine.
Yeah. But also, I think, again, kind of what that is a testament to is the lasting power of creating an iconic character, or just an icon in general.
Mm-hmm.
Because, again, Michael Myers is so synonymous with Halloween. Again, he is as iconic as Frankenstein. Or
maybe the trick is to create an icon, you have to rip off another icon, because as many people know, that Michael Myers mask is a Captain Kirk Star Trek mask.
Yeah, right.
So, when in doubt, take something iconic and turn it into something even more iconic.
Yeah. That's interesting. But, then again, you do have, like, what's his name? Jason, Friday the 13th. And what's interesting about that is, going into Friday the 13th now, the first 2 movies, he didn't have the goalie mask.
That's right.
And I remember, so I only dove into Friday the 13th like in my early 20s. So it was long after I'd heard about it, long after I'd wanted to watch it and stuff. And I remember watching the first one and just being so disappointed. I'm like, where is the goalie mask Jason icon?
Yeah.
And again, it's done pretty well.
Or even just, where is Jason?
Well, yeah, yeah, exactly. But it's done pretty well in terms of how they build. Sorry.
We'll edit that out.
Yeah. How they build the tension and stuff of just using kind of his POV or whatever. But it was disappointing because I was wanting to see that character.
Yeah.
And I don't think that those movies would, like, as I recall, when it came out, the first one was quite successful. But I really doubt that it would have had the same lasting power over time without that iconic
oh, absolutely. If that movie didn't get, I mean, the one thing that I hate to say that seems to be a common thing in all of these slasher franchises, and hopefully we'll have enough time to at least briefly chat about a lot of the big ones. But it does seem that the connection is that they seem to be connected to a franchise. Like, it's much harder to have a really iconic character from a movie that was so successful that it only needed maybe the one movie to have it. So,
although, you know what? There is one that I've been thinking of while we're talking. Mm-hmm. And you know what that is?
Is it a slasher movie, though?
Well, yes, kind of.
I think I know the one you're... I have an idea of maybe what you're going to say, but...
Okay, I'll take a guess.
Well, the one I'm thinking does have a sequel, but it was only recently a sequel, so I don't know if this counts. But I was going to say maybe you were going to say something like The Shining. No. Which I don't really think of as a slasher, but there is some chopping in it and stuff.
Yeah. No, that's a good guess. I was thinking of Psycho.
Well, Psycho has about 6 or so sequels. There's like 5 or 6 sequels. Oh yeah, we'll get. Let's talk about Psycho.
Okay, but
because Psycho's kind of the mother lode.
Nobody thinks about Psycho as a franchise, though. It's like, okay, you got the Hitchcock film, and then you've got the remakes of the Hitchcock film, and like, I don't know. Does anybody like? I wasn't even aware there was like sequels really.
Yeah. So funny enough, Psycho 2 is actually a really decent movie.
Is that right? Well, when
It's
was
actually
when was
worth
it made?
watching. Psycho 2 is made, I'm going to say like 1980 or maybe 1982.
Okay, so long after the first
Yeah,
one.
yeah. Like a good like 20 or so years later.
Let me just look this up because Psycho, the first Psycho movie came out in 1960.
Yeah. And I mean, you know what? We could even debate on if even Psycho would be the first slasher movie. It might be kind of like the first famous iconic one, but there might even be movies before that could technically count as slasher movies.
Yeah, you're probably right. I was just sort of thinking of it in terms of a one-off that's also very iconic and very memorable that people, obviously it's been well remembered and celebrated for a long time.
There's at least 4 with Anthony Perkins.
Okay.
So I know that there was a TV movie in the 80s called Bates Motel with Bud Cort. There's the obvious like 90s remake.
Wait, so when they did the one in the 80s, Anthony Perkins was in that again?
He's in the first 4. Yeah, he played Norman Bates about 4. He actually eventually Anthony Perkins started directing the Psycho movies. Like that's how involved he was with the franchise later on. And they almost started to become Psycho 2 is like a bona fide, like straightforward, serious sequel. But 3 and 4 are like, apparently they get really campy.
Okay.
I think number 4 is actually an origin story. So it's a lot of flashbacks to when he was young.
Psycho 3 in 1986 and then Psycho 4 in 1990. Wow. This is interesting. Well, that raises some interesting questions. One of the questions it raises for me is, would the original Psycho be as widely celebrated and remembered today if it didn't have those sequels?
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, it is a Hitchcock film, so of course, it would have its clout for that. But
the reason why I think it probably would, I think it probably would still, just because, well, as you're kind of a testament for, most people don't even know that those sequels exist. Like they're really not thought of a lot. I know Tarantino, he's a big fan of the second one. Mm-hmm. But really, other than the second movie, there's really not much praise for the franchise overall. Like it really was another one of those kind of cash grab franchises where they were just like, let's see how much we can kind of milk it. But I don't know. Yeah, maybe that franchise did help just kind of make Bates Motel and the name Norman Bates that much more iconic. Like I guess it did kind of create a new generation of audiences to kind of see those movies.
Yeah.
But,
and more sort of entry points for people too, right? Because I mean, let's say even Bates Motel, the TV series, that probably, I would imagine, could have drawn in a new generation of an audience who would then later on go and look back at the old movie and give the old movie the time of day because they like the show, perhaps. Yeah.
Actually, here's an interesting question you can ask yourself is, would we have ever have had any Psycho sequels if it wasn't for the crazy 80s slasher craze that happened in general? Because
that's an interesting question.
I really think that's why it happened, was just all of these crazy slasher movies were coming out and they were like, well,
what else could we do?
Why not cash in on the one that kind of started it all, right?
Yeah.
And I think if those other movies weren't doing that, I have a feeling Psycho probably wouldn't have had those sequels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think was the earliest slasher film then, if not a movie like Psycho?
I mean, I guess, so it would have to depend on like what officially counts as a slasher movie. Is it a movie where there's a high body count, or is it is it just a movie where there is a killer and bodies are popping up? Does it have to be specifically in the horror genre? Like, a lot of people kind of state that the thing that kind of started the whole even genre of this type of structure was Agatha Christie's 10 Little Indians. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's she did a lot of she was famous for doing a lot of mysteries, but she had this one particular story. I think it was a play actually, and it was called 10 Little Indians. It had another title called Then There Were None. And it was kind of like the first prototype that was essentially like the slasher system where there was a killer, but it was at like a dinner party But it was like, usually there was just one murder that would be solved. But I think this was like the first story where they were like, oh, just like one by one, everybody's getting knocked off.
Okay.
And so I'm trying to think like what would be maybe like the first movie that took that premise. Maybe there's a movie of 10 Little Indians, and maybe some might say that that's the first slasher. There's a campy movie I love called A Bucket of Blood, which I don't really think of as a slasher movie. It came out like a year before Psycho, but it is about a character who, kind of starts, killing some people. So like, that's kind of you're like, like how many kind of victims does this, character have to have for it to count as a slasher?
Well, and I feel like there's probably sort of a noir film that almost counts as a slasher film where there's a bunch of people getting murdered. And I wish I knew noir films better than I do, but that sort of seems to be a common theme with those as well, right? There'll be people getting killed one by one, and you're trying to figure out who did it again. I think the slasher film genre also tends to sort of depend on these more brutal deaths that are fairly violent.
Yep.
Like usually being stabbed to death with a knife, or having your throat slit, or being, impaled by a giant metal beam or something. Like, there's a brutality to the murders.
Yeah.
It's not just like this man was poisoned or this person was shot, it's like it doesn't count if you just got shot. It has to be some kind of brutal murder.
They're exploiting like the deaths themselves as the set pieces that you're there to see. So there's two other old slasher movies that I kind of want to just briefly bring up because they're fairly important to the genre. There's a movie that came out the same year as Psycho. It might have even come out a little bit before Psycho. Some people almost argue that this could maybe be the first slasher movie, and it's a movie directed by Michael Powell called Peeping Tom. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
I've seen that movie.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I first heard about it. I think I was listening to like a Scorsese interview where he was talking about it, and the actor, Karl Heinz Bohm.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah. He was actually in, this goes back to a conversation that you and I would have had, a number of times that whoever's listening doesn't know, but he was in the movie, The Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm.
Oh, you're right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. And so I recognized him from that, and I was like, wow, I got to check this movie out. Like it's that actor. I
have a feeling there's some movie out there made where he plays an amazing Nazi, but I could be wrong. But I mean, he would be great.
Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure he must be German. His name is Karl Heinz Bohm.
Yeah, but so just I don't know how long ago you saw it. You maybe saw it more recently than I did, but did you like Peeping Tom from what you remember?
I enjoyed it. Yeah, I would have seen it probably in the early 2010s, like 2011 or something like that.
It's obviously not, it's. With time, it's aged into not being probably the graphic, disturbing movie it was at the time, but it was quite a fairly shocking movie for its time.
Yeah. Well, and you're right. Like that does sort of, I mean, just reading and the synopsis and thinking about it too, like it is kind of a slasher film, but it's not super violent and graphic in the same way.
Yeah, no, it's more like psychologically. More like, I always think about how he's got that that reflective mirror. So like they end up like, seeing their own faces before that sort of like knife goes in them. But there was another slasher movie that in my eyes, I kind of think of as the first definitive slasher movie. And I don't know, this is probably a movie you probably haven't seen. A lot of the millions of listeners listening in probably haven't seen it either. But if you're a fan of slasher movies, there's it came out actually a few years after Psycho. It's called Blood and Black Lace, and I guess this would be an opportunity for me to go into the Italian giallo genre.
That's a subgenre.
Yeah. Well, in many ways.
Hold on. What's it called? I just want to look.
It's called Blood and Black Lace. It's one of Mario Bava, who's kind of the godfather of Italian horror. But he was kind of doing supernatural horror movies up until this one. This was probably his first official giallo film, and I hope I'm saying it right. Maybe it's giallo. It's a term going back to the old yellow paperback pulp novels made in Italy in the 50s that were essentially book versions of these slashers. And then in the 60s, they started making them into movies, but they really started to take off in the 70s. And they were very influential to what became of the 80s American slasher movies.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. That's really interesting, actually. So this movie came out in 1964.
Yeah. The reason I bring up this one is because it's really got a lot of the tropes of like your classic slasher, and that the killer is masked. You can't really see their face. It kind of, the killer kind of looks like the Blank from Dick Tracy. If you guys remember that character, this kind of character that literally didn't have a face, and it's in like a black trench coat and a black fedora. That's what the killer is in Blood and Black Lace. And he's stalking these models who like live kind of in this, it's like a dormitory of like Italian supermodels who are all living in this dorm, and he's just one by one knocking them off. And for the time, it was probably pretty graphic deaths. It's also, the movie's like beautiful looking. It's got like amazing cinematography. It's very colorful with its lighting. It's probably one of the classiest slasher movies I've ever seen. But that's probably like the first one I saw where I'm just like, this is just a bona fide, this is a slasher movie. As opposed to Psycho, which I love, but there's really only 2 murders in Psycho, you know?
Right. Yeah. Well, that's what's kind of interesting about it too, right? Is that it doesn't have a whole bunch of killing going on, but it's very memorable for almost just for a couple of scenes, right? Like the shower murder scene and then the climactic scene.
Well, and then there's also the detective who gets slashed and falls down the stairs. Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, really, I mean, it's kind of got those 3 little shocking moments.
Yeah.
And everything else is kind of really more suspense, which is, you know, obviously that's what Hitchcock was a master of. But I really think it's just, you know, it's just that it's that shower scene that like, which definitely had a lot of slashing.
Yeah.
But
well, and there's so many things that, so here's actually an interesting thing to touch upon in terms of trying to figure out what is it that makes a movie iconic versus not. And usually I tend to focus on music a lot. A lot of these things tend to have some sort of a memorable musical theme. Like, okay, so if you think about Psycho, everybody knows that music, those strings, those high pitched strings and stuff. The Halloween theme. I'm trying to think of what it would be for Friday the 13th. It's the shh, shh, shh.
If you want,
like things like that.
If you want to know, this is a really easy way to know the Friday the 13th sound, because it goes back to the first movie where at the end with Mrs. Voorhees, when she's kind of being, I guess, kind of, you know, she's sort of like being possessed by her son Jason, or at least she feels she is, and she kind of like takes on his voice. And what he's constantly saying near the end of the movie when she's chasing the last girl is "killer mommy." So what the composer did was he took the first 2 syllables of "kill" and "mom," which is why it goes
Oh,
so there's a little trivia bit there, but yeah, that's what I always think of as the sort of the Friday the 13th sound, which
yeah.
In the later movies it kind of did just kind of get bastardized into just like like they just didn't know kind of what to do with it.
That's
but that was the origin of it, was what they had all the way back from the first movie. But yeah, no, that's a good point though. A lot of these Friday the 13th was another one. Like they all have these very iconic little musical themes in them. You know?
Yeah, well, and I think what I really more broadly want to talk about is I think there's a lot of things kind of coming together where it's sort of the whole experience. It's the iconic character. It's whether or not the movie's actually well made and well done. In terms of making it effectively scary for the audience. Does it have things like memorable musical themes? Lots of stuff like that, you know?
Yeah. I think not that we should stay focused on Psycho, but I guess the one last thing I wanted to say about what Psycho's probably its main influence on the slasher genre was that it was probably the first movie that kind of made sort of a cinematic art form of the kill scene itself, right? Where before that we just didn't really have those kind of sequences. You wouldn't linger on a murder scene. They would be very fast and they'd kind of be very awkward, and it wouldn't be a stabbing. It would usually just kind of be like, someone getting shot, or even when people got punched in movies,
or it happens off screen or something, and it's more like you discover the aftermath. And that's kind of what the scary part is. But
with the editing and the frames and that, people for decades were studying just that shower sequence alone because of how much stuff was happening in it. And so I think what that did was it inspired a whole new generation of storytellers to be like, that's something you can do in a movie. And so all these directors kept trying to like kind of almost one up each other on being like how elaborate and graphic and shocking, but I think almost mainly like elaborate, like how cinematic can we kind of make these death scenes. And I think that's what a lot of the Italian directors were kind of trying to do in the 60s and 70s. It was almost like Hitchcock kind of gave them the pass because he was such a respected director. They were kind of like, oh, well, we're kind of doing what Hitchcock was doing. We're just, elevating it to the next level or something. Brian De Palma would be another really good example of that, where not that Brian De Palma was really making slasher movies, but he was making thrillers where he was really focused on when there were death scenes that he would, make them these very just elaborate and well planned out sequences.
Okay. Yeah. What would those movies have been?
Well, so you could kind of like, certain Brian De Palma movies, you can almost connect with almost specific Hitchcock movies. Like you could kind of link Dressed to Kill with Psycho. He made a movie called Body Double, which would be a lot of references to Rear Window. Even movie like Phantom of the Paradise kind of like, references like the shower sequence in Psycho.
Oh, okay.
He would use Bernard Herrmann as a composer, and I guess Sisters was probably Brian De Palma's first movie where he was starting to do this sort of Hitchcockian style.
Oh, okay. And
you see it a lot in Brian De Palma's work, I think in like the 70s and 80s especially. Raising Cain, that's a 90s movie with John Lithgow. Again, these are all kind of really thrillers, but they definitely have a lot of that sort of Hitchcockian kind of influence to them.
I'm just making a list of some of the movies I want to watch during the month of October that we've been touching upon, because some of these, of course, I haven't seen. So I put Blood and Black Lace. What was that Michael Rosenbaum film you mentioned?
Urban Legend.
Oh, Urban Legend. Okay, I'm going to watch that.
Yeah, it's fun. It don't expect anything, once the killer's revealed near the end, you're kind of like, oh, okay. That's where, you kind of really see the Scream kind of references, when they're kind of like, who is it? But I don't know. I think it's a fun one.
Yeah.
Here's an interesting question. Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Oh, okay.
Is it a slasher film?
I think of it as a slasher film because I'd put Leatherface in the same camp. If you're talking about like making a movie poster with a collage of all the classic, more, I guess, contemporary horror icons, I would put him amongst there with Michael Myers and Jason and Freddy Krueger and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's I think Texas,
and it's got like all the brutal murders and everything.
Yeah,
I mean, it almost doesn't get more horrific than being cut up with a chainsaw.
Yeah. The first movie, it kind of came out before the slasher craze, so I don't think it was trying to like be a slasher movie, say in the way the 80s movies were, where they were very much aware of what they were marketing to.
Yeah.
But and maybe the Leatherface films don't have maybe as high a body count. Like it's not even, the Texas Chainsaw movies don't even seem to be about, let's just see him kill more people. It's usually like they almost seem to kill off all of the main characters like halfway through the film, and then they just torture some poor girl for the rest of it. That's kind of like what I kind of find with it, where
yeah, you're talking about specifically the first one, right? Because of course that's had a lot of remakes and stuff too.
I mean, that's kind of even a lot of the sequels. I do find that that's kind of a thing that it's kind of like, yeah, they kind of kill off a bunch of the characters, and there's like then there's a big portion of it, just like the main character just kind of being like stuck with the family and dealing with them and stuff. But no, I love Texas Chainsaw. I think it's one of the great ones for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, we could go down. We just keep kind of going down the list of slashers.
Well, what I would sort of like to talk about a little more is some of these more obscure ones.
Yeah.
Like, so we've talked a lot about a lot of the classics, but some of the ones that have maybe been forgotten over time, like I mentioned Valentine, and I imagine a lot of people listening probably don't even know what that is, or maybe they vaguely remember it. Oh yeah, I remember that came out, and maybe I watched it, maybe I didn't, but probably forgot about it.
Have you seen My Bloody Valentine?
When did that come out?
So the original one, the only reason I bring it up is because the original one is kind of considered kind of one of like the classic Canadian horror movies. Weirdly, I know a lot of these horror, I don't know why, like slasher movies in particular, like Canada seemed to be a place where they would go to make a lot of these.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like Black Christmas, for instance, preceded like Friday the 13th, right? And Halloween maybe even.
Not only did it precede Halloween, but Halloween originally was supposed to be the sequel to Black Christmas. A lot of people don't know that.
Oh, yeah. Well, it makes sense. It's like they were going for this holiday theme.
Yeah.
And then...
Yeah. And if you watch Black Christmas, it's got a lot.
They were going to do Dark Easter was going to be the third one.
It was going to be Dark Easter, and then Deadly Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, Black Christmas is another one of my all-time favorites. I mean, honestly, Black Christmas is up there with Halloween and Texas Chainsaw as far as some of the best 70s horror movies. I mean, I have a lot of personal connections to Black Christmas. I don't even know if I want to get into that because I could just go off on that for a long time. I used to...
Well, that might be interesting to talk about, actually. I don't know if I've heard all of these stories.
Well, the funny thing is the original movie was shot very close to where I grew up in Toronto. But the remake was shot right near Deer Lake in Burnaby.
Oh, no way.
Which wasn't actually all that far to where I was also living at one time.
Wow, it just follows you around.
It just followed. My whole life is one big Black Christmas. I have not seen the full Black cast remake of Black Christmas. That I guess
You'd think they'd be all about doing that nowadays.
Oh, they did. No, this is a real movie. It exists. Oh, okay. I just haven't seen it, and I guess you have not as either. This is,
or is it a family comedy?
Apparently, I don't know how close it's connected to the other movies, but apparently it's a Black Christmas remake where it's the same premise, but it's an all black cast from what I know. Oh, okay, unless it's just it might just be a generic, just slasher Christmas movie that maybe doesn't have any more of a connection than that, but
yeah.
But yeah, no, Black Christmas is a really good one. I mean, yeah, the director Bob Clark. I mean, we could almost do a whole other episode just on him and his other horror movies. He didn't make a lot, but they're all pretty decent. Not as good as Black Christmas, but they're good. I'm actually even glad you brought up Sleepy Hollow earlier because
it did that. I mean, that definitely
it really is a slasher when you think about it.
Well, it is, right? It is. I mean, it's got the brutal killings, the beheadings. Yeah. I mean, like how much more brutal is it than that? It's pretty horrific, and there's again, it's this body count that's piling up, and it's not. In some ways, it is a bit of a whodunit because they're trying to figure out, like, is this some guy in a costume or is it this spiritual creature or whatever. There's a little bit of a it kind of crosses over between the supernatural horror and the slasher genre in a way.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on this? So a lot of people have a take on the slasher era, mainly like the 80s slasher era, because that was like the big, that was like because after Scream in the 90s, that kind of became like the second era, the kind of like the self-aware kind of reboot era of the slashers. But an interesting thing about a lot of people, say it's really important about, what horror, the genre of horror in the decade it's in has a lot of reflection of the times. And a lot of people kind of view the slasher era, that was the Reagan era of America, where things were becoming very conservative. That was kind of, you might have been a little bit too young to remember this. I barely remembered there was the kind of like the whole like just say no campaign in the 80s that was being pushed a lot, a very kind of anti-drug period. It was kind of like, like anti-drugs, anti-sex and all these things. And people kind of thought that the slasher genre was actually a reflection. It was almost like that the slasher genre almost had a very conservative Christian value on things. And the way they broke it down was that it was kind of these movies that were sort of representing kind of a lot of hedonism that these kids would do and then be punished for, right? Because who was always the survivor in a slasher movie?
Oh, usually like the
pure virgin, right?
Yeah.
And the second you would then kind of go and do drugs and have sex, you'd get killed.
Right.
And so some people would almost view the characters like Jason as almost the wrath of God himself coming down and bringing order to these sinful hooligans,
Well, see, I guess one of the things, it's interesting because on one hand, one of the things that kind of makes these movies satisfying to watch is watching detestable people like justice be served in a sense, It'll be like some douchebag jock guy who like gets, his balls ripped off by a hook or something where you're like, yeah, fuck yeah. You're almost rooting for the killer sometimes in these movies. Well,
and that was actually kind of a criticism that even parents and people against these movies started to have later on, because they noticed it was an interesting thing. And I think this was just a thing that wasn't planned. I think this was just like a natural evolution that happened through the 80s, which was that in the earlier movies, like if you watch the earlier Friday the 13th and maybe like the first couple of Nightmare on Elm Streets, they were kind of usually a little bit darker, a little bit more serious, where they were meant to be scary. You were meant to be scared of the villains. And then something kind of switches halfway kind of through the franchise where they sort of realized, oh no, like the kids are actually having fun watching these people die. Let's actually make the movie that rather than you having to relate to the teenagers, they started flipping it so that you would actually relate to the killer.
Okay.
And you would actually get a lot of like glee and excitement watching them kill these people off.
Yeah.
And I think that was another thing that was starting to maybe freak out certain parents, who would, there was this whole kind of idea of, these movies are corrupting the youth. And maybe there was more of an argument to be said if it got to the point where when the killers start becoming kind of wisecracking and it's kind of comedic, where it's almost sometimes even funny, something like these death scenes. And honestly, I can totally relate to that. When I was watching a lot of these movies, like me and my friends, we would be looking forward to these deaths. You knew it was coming. And again, it's a movie, it's not real. I don't think people are watching those Saw movies because they're, wanting to see the Jigsaw character get his ass kicked. They want to see these horrible torture devices, like, destroy people.
Well, see, this is where it's interesting too, where there is a thing that sort of seems to be going on in the human psyche, which is you can have a fantasy about something without wanting that thing to actually happen.
Yeah.
That's obviously, there's all kinds of examples of that, but that's partially what entertainment is for, right? Is it's this outlet to show people that, but it's not that it's corrupting people. I think it's just almost giving you an outlet or some sort of a sense of satisfaction of getting to carry it out in your imagination, see it depicted in some way.
It's still far more passive than playing a video game where you're literally just killing people.
But even in that case, even if you're like, so say for instance, people would say violent video games, the fear is that violent video games would be inspiring kids to be more violent or something, which I don't think seems to be the case.
I think it's just an outlet, right?
An outlet, yeah. In many ways, maybe it's better that we have it than if we don't have it.
Yeah. I think we still have these monkey brains where, we've forgotten that it wasn't that long ago that we used to just be constantly hunting, just in general, or fighting in wars. And so there's always going to be that kind of aggressive outlet that's going to probably have to come out in one way or another. And, I don't know. I'm sure we both know tons of people who play lots of violent video games, watch lots of violent movies. And I don't know. That's actually one of the points that I thought was actually one of the most poignant things about the original Scream movie that they kind of tackled, which was that, the movies themselves don't really create the killer. But if you are already kind of, if you're already messed up in the head and want to do terrible things, then I guess, you have material to help make you be more creative about it. But, but that's not that created a person like that. Because as we can, see, like the majority of the people can, handle these things and, and be fine with it.
There's obviously so many people who play Grand Theft Auto or watch any of these movies or whatever who are very passive people and they're not going out committing violent acts against each other.
I mean, cinema's 130 years old? There's been a lot of violence long before that, right? So, if just
arguably more, maybe. I don't know.
More, and it was probably much more. It was much worse and barbaric in many ways, So, but
just quickly, do you want to here? Maybe I'll go make us another drink. I don't know if you want another one.
Oh,
I'm gonna
okay.
have one myself.
Sure, yeah. Do we take a little pause?
Sure.
Yeah.
We will be right back. And we are back, ladies and gentlemen, back from our break. We made a old-fashioned here. Oliver and I have just been throwing back these old fashions. But anyway, so what I did want to get into a little bit more in depth was speaking of kind of obscure movies, slasher films, but I Know What You Did Last Summer, because I feel like that's a movie that was quite iconic at the time, but I really doubt that most people really talk about it a lot nowadays. I don't think many people really talk about it, or it's certainly not it's certainly not memorable the way that Scream is. Yeah,
that was kind of, I remember at the time that was like the distinctive, like after Scream came out, that was the first kind of real slasher follow-up. And immediately people were making connections to Scream. I mean, for one thing, they were actually both written by Kevin Williamson. So I think they were bound to both be compared. But I also remember when I first saw that movie, I saw it in theaters. Unlike Scream, I did see I Know What You Did Last Summer in theaters.
Oh, cool.
And I think it's just the magic of when you see something on the big screen. The second that movie ended, I left the theater with my friends and I was like, that movie is better than Scream, which it is not. But I did feel that way at the time. Because that last shot of just that fisherman just breaking through the screen. Oh man, I was hooked, you might say. But no, it's I don't know. For me, that movie, along with Scream, it's I don't even know if I can have a fair opinion. It's there's some strong nostalgia with this time in my life. I mean,
that always makes a big difference, right? Is when you kind of anchor your life memories to a movie or music or whatever is going on kind of culturally. And again, kind of going into the iconography too, there's, I guess, kind of one of the things that's iconic about that movie is the notes that everybody gets.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's obviously a big key component to the movie, and it is sort of an original thing, this idea that this guy's like sending out these notes and stuff.
So this is another thing I was curious about. It's that problem that I always have whenever I think something's original and I'm like, is it actually? And then I look into it, I'm like, oh crap, maybe it's
probably
not. Well, I was, no, I think the movie was fairly, I think there was, I think the movie was definitely influenced by some things, but it seems like it was a pretty original idea. I can't remember if the movie actually might have even originally been maybe a book, but I don't know if
Okay.
that was whether that was a book that Kevin Williamson adapted. But the only reason I'm bringing all this up is because a few years ago I watched this 60s movie called I Saw What You Did.
Okay.
And it was this old Joan Crawford movie. And I don't know if you could really call it a horror movie. It's probably more like a thriller, but it kind of had a bit of the, it was kind of using a little bit of the premise of I Know What You Did Last Summer. But weirdly enough, it was also, I think, one of the very first movies that used the telephone as a premise where someone's getting these phone calls and not knowing what. So it's in a weird way, it was almost kind of a combination of a little bit of Scream and a little bit of I Know What You Did Last Summer. So if you're expecting
but
scary,
then wasn't Black Christmas also used the telephone theme?
which would have still been
as well, right?
Yes. So in the 70s, there's two movies that I think of, which was Black Christmas and When a Stranger Calls, which they both use the trope of the calls are coming from inside the house.
Okay.
But this movie that I saw called I Saw What You Did, that's like from like 1965. So that's like the oldest one I can think of that kind of has that sort of stalker kind of feel of, oh, there's a secret that this person knows. And then combining the phone element of it, I was just
funny
like, oh,
because
this is neat.
that could only happen after the phone had been properly integrated into the average American home too, right?
But anyways, yeah, that was my only comment on there. And I can't really think of, there's no other movie that I can think of that even kind of comes close to being connected to I Know What You Did Last Summer. Maybe I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. That's a whole other one we can get into.
Well, that was the immediate sequel, wasn't it?
That was, yeah.
I haven't seen that. So actually, and what I will actually say about this too is I only watched I Know What You Did Last Summer last year.
Oh.
Like last Halloween.
Well, I know what you watched last summer.
Last fall, actually.
Yeah.
But
tell me what you think about it. I'd love to just know your thoughts on what you liked, what you didn't like.
Because again, this had been one of those movies that was so... I was in such anticipation of watching it when I was a kid, but couldn't watch it because people would talk about it. Oh, yeah, the guy with the hook who, like, you know, fuck... I was drawn to this dark stuff, and, you know, I heard about a guy who's going around killing people with a hook, and it sounded very interesting. But, you know, way too young to watch it at the time, and so it had sat there in the back of my mind for a long time. Like, I eventually want to see this, but I hadn't gotten around to it. So it was like finally last year. And by the way, we're coming at you tonight. Currently, it is September 20th, 2023. Like I just finally kind of got around to watching the movie, and you know, you get like Jennifer Love Hewitt in there, and who's it? Freddie Prinze Jr. I think is in the movie.
Freddie Prinze Jr., Ryan Philippe.
Was Sarah Michelle Gellar?
Sarah Michelle. That was the movie where Freddie Prinze and Sarah Michelle Gellar first met, and they've got what, 2 kids? I don't know.
Well, and so that was kind of like their breakout roles, I think, for a number of those people. Like they weren't
definitely
really...
Freddie Prinze's. I don't know if I would say it's Sarah Michelle Gellar's breakthrough movie, but it's probably the first major feature film I could think of that she came out at.
What about Jennifer Love Hewitt?
Because
again,
probably
she was
the big
so
one.
big at that time.
So yeah, like they were kind of. I kind of thought at that time. I kind of thought of them as more TV actresses.
Okay.
You know, Sarah Michelle Gellar was coming strong off of Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Oh,
Jennifer Love Hewitt was doing Party of Five, and you know she'd be in movies, but they wouldn't be starring Jennifer Love Hewitt.
Okay,
you know, Freddie Prinze Jr. I think that was like his first movie, and Ryan Philippe had done a few little things. So yeah, but I remember when that movie came out, I already knew who Jennifer Love Hewitt and Sarah Michelle Gellar were, so they were obviously somewhat, at least you know, as a teenager. Looking back, I think they seemed like bigger stars than they were. And looking back, I just realized, when you're a teenager, you're up to date on all like the teen icons.
Well, and there's more of a mainstream, and your sense of timing is a little bit different as well at that age, because like some, you know, things can unfold over a year, and you're like, wow, this person's been in the tabloids or whatever for the last year. And it feels like they've been around for a long time, you know?
Funny enough, at the time, I remembered I was probably more impressed that Bridget Wilson had a small role in the movie, and Bridget Wilson was like the original Sonya Blade from Mortal Kombat, and probably to me, she was probably a bigger star than...
You were like, oh, this movie has Bridget Wilson. Nobody else cares, but...
Exactly, yeah.
Anne Hesh. Why do I know that movie?
Anne Heche?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that was actually my introduction to Anne Heche. So funny enough, we were earlier talking about the Psycho remake. Anne Heche was the Vivian Leigh character in the Psycho remake, and she was in another number of other things.
Okay.
She actually tragically just passed away
Anne
just a
Heche.
year or two ago.
Yeah.
But no, she was definitely. It's weird. It's like after that movie, I started seeing Anne Heche pop up in a bunch of late '90s movies. But that was my intro to Anne Heche, chopping up like fish guts in like a small town that Jennifer Love Hewitt visits. That's like my main. She has like a small little role in the movie. But
okay.
But yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting watching that in retrospect too, because it is such a '90s film.
Yeah,
like it's got '90s written all over it, and it's quite like cheesy and stuff, and it was not scary at all. Like
no,
but the thing that I think that if I'd watched it at that young age, I would have found it, it would have spooked me out. But the thing about these movies in general is I don't really watch them because I find them scary, I guess. It's more so just the atmosphere and the vibe that I enjoy, and kind of the build up, the suspense, and but it's not so much that I'm sitting there feeling scared about what's going to happen.
It's funny, at the time when I watched these movies, I'm like, wow, these movies are so modern. This is such a modern film. And I go back and I watch these movies now and I'm like, wow, that's what a 90s movie was.
Yeah. Well, and that's what's so cool about living through it too, is like, because when you're growing up and you're watching stuff from, previous decades, you can really distinctly see the style. But it's harder to be aware of that when you're in the midst of it, and you can only discover it looking back on it after some time and seeing it sort of in context.
Really. It took a while. Like it's like it didn't take very long to recognize the 80s or 70s style, but the 90s one it took a bit of time to realize what the 90s movie was.
Totally. I feel like it was like in the late 90s I was looking back on the 80s and going, "Oh yeah, I know what the 80s was all I can clearly identify what the 80s was like, like the hair, the crazy colors, the neon lights, like over I don't know, just over the topness of it. It was
so many things. It wasn't just one thing. It was like a compilation of things. Well,
but it's just so distinct. It's very identifiable, right? Whereas being that age and then going into the 2000s and stuff, I didn't really start to recognize stuff as being 90s, quote unquote, probably until like the early 2010s, maybe.
Yeah.
Like it took a little while for me to sort of be like, okay, now I'm seeing what the 90s was.
Yeah. I'm still not even really sure what the early 2000s feel for movies is. Like to me, the early 2000s is not very different to the later 2000s.
Yeah.
But
I sort of do think of it as like the last good era of movies.
I think yeah.
Because I can think of lots of good stuff from basically throughout the 2000s. I can think of lots of good stuff. But post 2010, it's like it just got more and more obscure that I'm really impressed by something.
It felt just more and more like just this, it's like they kind of figured out, or at least they felt they figured out the code of filmmaking, and they just started kind of pumping out this almost like machine-based.
Everything's generic. It doesn't, and none of it matters. It's like I don't care about any of it.
That's a big part of it too. That was really the beginning of movies being made. Kind of, it felt more by a corporation of people as opposed to an individual storyteller with a vision.
Or even just like really solid entertainment.
Well, maybe we should I'm thinking maybe we should talk about maybe some more obscure slasher movies. I was going to say maybe we should try to think of more modern ones, but in a weird way, when I think of the real slasher eras, and it seems to be the periods that we keep going back to, is it's kind of like the 80s and then that sort of 90s revival period. Those seem to be kind of the core kind of slasher eras. After that, it's kind of...
One thing that just popped into my mind actually is the Chucky movies. Are those slasher films?
So I think if Leatherface, if the Texas Chainsaw movies count, I do feel that because if Chucky isn't the only other thing you could put Chucky under is evil demonic toy, sort of genre.
That's a very specific genre.
But he's such a he's a slasher character. He's a smaller guy, but
one of the reasons I ask is I haven't actually seen like any of those movies.
Oh,
I was in the remake, the one that had what was it called? I think
it's just called Child's Play, which was the name of the original.
2018 or something. Yeah.
And that was
they filmed that.
That was the reboot movie. That wasn't the TV show, right? Because I think
it was the movie.
I think they might shoot. I think the TV show might also be shot out here, but I could be. Well, nothing's being shot out here now, but we might have had the TV show. But before we go into Chucky, I'm just curious. What were your experiences working on it? I don't know if you had. It probably wasn't a very frightening day on set, but was it?
No, it was fun. It was definitely fun and interesting. I got to. They covered me in blood. I have some photos of myself that I could post. So the funny thing is actually this was. It must have been Halloween time 2018 because I remember I had a mustache at the time and I was dressing up as Freddie Mercury for Halloween.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So I was on set of Child's Play and I had a mustache and they like covered me in blood and stuff and I was going to be just like a dead person on the ground laying in the background. And unfortunately, I watched the movie and I didn't see my little cameo in there.
Okay.
But it was fun. I was in the scene where a bunch of remote control Bluetooth helicopters or drones or whatever. I think Chucky or the doll or whatever takes control of them via Bluetooth and they're flying around and their propellers are chopping people
way
up.
More elaborate of a scene than I thought. I thought maybe you were just in like a random boring scene. Like you literally got killed by Chucky.
Yeah. It was a fun sequence actually.
Yeah. Well, you know what, guys? You got to go out and I guess get the DVD. And I bet you if you look for those special features, you're gonna find a mustachioed Kevin Rosmer. So. Look out for that.
I just might be in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if I really found myself at all in that movie. I think there's probably like a couple little brief shots where I could see myself running around in the background, but I didn't get much of a cameo. It's too bad. Yeah.
As far as my 2 cents on the Chucky franchise, so I've seen the first 4 movies. I'd really recommend the first 2. The second one is actually probably my favorite of the series, although the first one I do think is quite good too. I don't really know how I feel about I'm glad Chucky exists. It's a hard franchise to really take seriously. Like the first movie probably is the scariest one, but even in the first one, you just see too much of that. I want to say that Freddy Krueger influence, where at this point they were kind of like, you know what kids love is they love a wisecracking killer. And Chucky is definitely that. And I think I don't think it would be better if he wasn't like that, but I think eventually the movies almost became full blown comedies. By the time I got to Bride to Chucky,
that's the problem, right? They kind of go too far in one direction and then it becomes less and less of what it originally was and what originally made it great.
Yeah, the first one is almost like a Martin Scorsese horror movie because it's like it's in New York and it's got this like weird gritty feel to it. And I was surprised. I was like, this is what Child's Play is? Because to be honest, when I saw the second movie, that actually was the movie that felt like what I expected Chucky to be.
Okay.
Because it's taking Chucky out of, I don't know, downtown Harlem and putting him into like the suburbs.
Yeah.
But the effects are great. Like, my God, like, if you're a fan, as I think most horror fans are, you're probably not the biggest fan of CGI, but if you like some really good, great practical effects with animatronics and puppetry, the movie's great for that. And also, he's played by Brad Dourif, who is a wonderful actor, and I don't think
he's voiced by.
He's voiced. Sorry, yeah. Okay. Well, actually, Brad Dourif is in the first movie. You do actually get the sort of whole origin of what makes Chucky in the first film.
Okay.
And then I don't know. It's like I feel almost like Brad Dourif tapped into his old memories of being with Jack Nicholson on One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, because there's a bit of Jack Nicholson.
I can totally see that.
There's a bit of Jack.
Definitely.
In,
it's
in,
weird.
in Chucky.
He's like this baby Jack Nicholson.
You can even see it a bit in the face, like when Chucky goes evil. They give him a bit more of a widow's peak, and I don't know. I'm glad I'm glad. I don't know if Brad Dourif did it purposefully or subconsciously, but it was definitely a good choice. I think they're now, I don't know, I think now they've rebooted Chucky to the point that I don't even know if Brad Dourif is still doing it, but that'd be a shame, because I can't imagine anybody doing Chucky better than him. But
well, and speaking of the iconography and stuff too, it's like
it's all good. Nothing spilled.
Oliver died, ladies and gentlemen.
Sorry, it's just I thought Kevin was going to deter away from Chucky, and I was going to have none of it. I was just like, no, the rest of the podcast will be on Chucky.
Yeah. He just like threw a pair of pliers at me.
I feel very strongly about this killer doll topic.
But I was going to say, like, Chucky is quite an icon himself, and you can't walk into a Spirit Halloween store without seeing that stuff showing up somewhere, like a mask or some sort of little animatronic doll.
I think it's a real
decoration.
It's a real it's become a real cosplay favorite for parents who are trying to think of things to dress their like under 2-year-old in, and I'm seeing a lot more of just these cute little, babies and toddlers dressed up as Chucky.
What's interesting too is it's like our generation of like people who are kids in our generation are the ones who are having kids nowadays too, right? Like, I mean, I'm 34. Most people who grew up in my grade or around there have got kids now, so they're starting to like celebrate Halloween with their own kids, and they're taking those influences and those references from things that they loved from their own generation and passing it on to their own children.
I mean, and it's crazy to think that, even just the Chucky franchise alone is over 30 years old. And that's kind of, in a weird way, probably one of the more recent franchises compared to the ones we've been talking tonight about the slashers. Like Chucky was kind of almost one of the, aside from Scream.
Well, that was like mid 90s and stuff too, probably, right? Like,
well, the first Chucky was late 80s.
Oh, was it actually?
But it was kind of, compared to the early, we think of this franchise as like the 80s. So Chucky kind of came almost towards the end of the cusp of the 80s slasher thing. And then the sequels then continued on into the 90s. But just the fact that Chucky is as old as it is, it just kind of makes you realize, like, my God, like, Halloween is coming close to 50 years now. The original Halloween, it's getting pretty close.
Wow, isn't that nuts?
Yeah. Like half a century we've had Michael Myers. Jeez. Almost, like, if you
didn't feel old before now.
Well, I think we're 1 year away from the 50th anniversary of Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah.
So,
well, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Soon enough, we ourselves will be coming close to the 50-year mark.
That's the true. Like, well, that's the scariest thing you're going to be hearing on the podcast. I don't know. Yes. Do we want to? We could keep talking about Child's Play, or we could jump into some of the other. Slashers.
Let's keep on going with this exploration of the more obscure stuff, right? Like what can you think of that was like a forgotten slasher film from? I don't know, any period, really. So, because I got a few in mind. But
again, I think the ones that are the most forgotten are the standalone movies that never got maybe even one sequel. Those seem to be the ones that...
and they probably never got a sequel because they weren't major hits to begin with.
Well, that's the thing. And so I guess the question is maybe some of these movies were... maybe they weren't the hits that they deserved to be, but maybe they were good enough that they could have had a franchise, just... if maybe enough people had seen their movies. Well, here's a kind of an obscure one that I'll bring up real quick. It's kind of got a little bit of Texas Chainsaw vibes. I would be very surprised if you've heard of this movie. It came out in the late 70s, and it's called Tourist Trap. And it's almost like
That name sounds familiar. I wouldn't have seen it though.
it's almost like Texas Chainsaw Massacre meets House of Wax. It's the character is very Texas Chainsaw like, but he's got like all of these. He lives in this like shack, and he's got all of these like mannequins in his place. But there's even like a supernatural element where like the mannequins kind of become alive. You don't know if like the souls of his victims are like somehow in them, but I don't know. It's a movie that, I mean, I can't really probably go too deep into it.
So it was just one, right? Like
it's just one movie. This is a one-off movie. This was kind of a thing that, you know, I started kind of hearing about from on sort of obscure horror movie lists, that this was kind of like a unique one to kind of check out. And you watch it and you're like, part of me is kind of like, yeah, I'm sort of surprised this one didn't at least maybe get like a sequel. Like it kind of felt like it sort of had a lot of the sort of iconic things that some of these other movies had. Maybe not quite as iconic, but honestly, I would say it was probably better than the original Friday the 13th, which I kind of find is sort of a weak movie if it wasn't for the fact that it started a franchise.
Yeah.
So that might be, you know, if you guys are looking for if you guys like old classic slasher movies, and you're looking for one that maybe isn't as well known, maybe check out Tourist Trap. I don't know. Is there another one of you?
I should add that to my list.
Yeah. But if there's any other, Kevin, that you've seen that you might want to recommend, maybe we can go back and forth and.
Well, all I know is I'm gonna be a lot more cultured by the end of this Halloween. I'm gonna have all these movies. I'm actually looking forward to jumping into a bunch of these. The ones that I would like to touch upon and talk about are these. They were like these low budget, shitty, lame horror films that my friends and I used to watch back in the day, more so as comedies because they were just so badly made.
Do you think were these maybe movies made in the 90s, kind of almost after the 80s craze?
No, I think they were early 2000s movies, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But, so one of them would be called it was called Shredder, and it was like I swear I think they were deliberately being funny because they would have slogans on the front box where it was like death to snowboarders, Shredder, death to snowboarders. it's so cheesy. You're just like rolling your eyes and can't help but laugh at it. But at the same time, my friends and I couldn't help but rent it from the video store because it was just, wow, we have to see this movie.
And you guys did it right, because I swear that's what those movies were made for. And like,
I know, and they were the funniest movies to watch too, because they were so entertaining, they were so memorable. Like, again, most people are not going to remember these; they're not going to be remembered through time. But for our generation, if you were a person who, you know, grew up going to the video store and you remember, you know, going to video rental stores back in the early to mid 2000s. You would have probably seen this somewhere on the shelf, and there was like one or two of them, one or two copies, and you would have just been like just rolling your eyes and laughing at the cover alone.
I remember Shredder. I never saw it, but I remember seeing it either in the video store or maybe I saw it maybe like on the internet. No, I'm sure I saw it in the video store, and sometimes you just look at a cover and you can get the vibes on everything about the movie. But
did you ever hear of one called Miner's Massacre? And it was just this black miner face. The guy's got like a pickaxe in his hand, and the slogan was "They axed for it." Right. And again, it follows all of the classic slasher movie tropes where you've got like a bunch of teens get together. Like, so say for instance, Shredder. It's a bunch of like irresponsible, douchey teens who get together to go up to like a ski resort that the you know, rich girl's father owns, and you know, they just party and have sex, and they're really obnoxious and irresponsible and stuff. And Shredder just like hates snowboarders because he's a skier. It's so great. Such a great movie. You know, totally worth checking out if you can find it.
Well, and that's the thing, is it's like you did it you were the perfect market for what that movie was. It was young,
exactly, yeah.
It was like kind of like preteen boys watching them together. Can you imagine just watching that movie by you rented David Fincher's Seven and Shredder, and you're watching them by yourself, and you're just studying it frame by frame, and you just be like, what am I doing? But you watch it with some friends, you have some, I don't know, some drinks and laughs, and you talk over the movie.
Well, we were like 13, 14 at the time, so
that is the peak age for these movies.
I know, that's just it. That's just it. I was just gonna say we weren't drinking, but we would go get our snacks and stuff. This is what our routine was. We'd go down to Movie Gallery, walk down there, rent our movies, walk over to the IGA grocery store, buy some chips, buy some soda, go back to my friend's house. We would watch all these movies. We'd sleep over. And it was like the best time, but they were so funny. And the funny, like I was a skier personally. And so it was like, there's a part of me inside that's rooting for this.
You connected with Shredder. You felt Shredder's pain. Yeah.
And again, it's got all like the classic kills. Like there's a part where he pulls like a cable, like a very thin wire across a track, so that when the snowboarder is zooming down, or it's like a guy on a snowmobile or something, he's flying down and doesn't see this cord that's been pulled across the trail, and he gets like decapitated by this cord that Shredder like pulled across there. Man, great stuff. Like it hits all the tropes, but it was just, man, hilarious too. There's so many funny things.
Have you double checked? Do we know if Shredder was a standalone movie? Shredder might be a trilogy for all we know at this point, right?
I imagine, I'm pretty sure it probably is still a standalone. However, I will say this: shout out to the lead male actor in that movie. It was the guy who did the voice of Aladdin.
Wait, are we talking about the guy who used to act in Full House back in the... I always thought that the guy who was Aladdin was the boyfriend of one of the girls from Full House. I could be wrong.
Let me see. Let me just go check. Scott Weinger.
Yeah, that doesn't...
Yeah, so he did, again, just like... I think he's quite an obscure actor. I don't know about him besides Aladdin. He was the voice of,
but he was Aladdin in the original, in the.
And see, this is the thing.
Was he on Full House? That's all I wanted. That's all I need to know.
He was in Fuller House.
So that means he was in Full House.
Oh, he must have been. Yeah,
I think by contract, if you're in Fuller House, you have to be in Full House. But he would be the boyfriend on Full House. Yeah, this literally his two claims of fame are Full House and Aladdin
and Shredder.
I'm sorry. Apologies. I have yet to see, but it is as classic as the other ones.
Yeah, man. But this guy, I remember. So we had absolutely no idea, but when we were like checking out the credits later on, it was just like, no fucking way. This guy who was in Shredder did the voice of Aladdin.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because, that's the way that's
he
the
was
way
the voice
Disney...
of Shredder?
No. He was the main male character. You know how like in those movies you got the... you got like we were talking about, there's like the pure decent girl who's like pretty innocent and doesn't do anything wrong, but then there's like some bitchy girl and she's probably cheating on her boyfriend and stuff like that.
I just thought it would have been cool if he was the Shredder, because it would have been his own way of showing these victims a whole new world. But I might. It sounds it's like you're almost selling me on Shredder, and maybe what we should.
I recommend you check it out, to be honest.
Maybe what we should talk about. Oh, sorry. Do you want to? Do you have more to say about Shredder?
Well, I just wanted to say, in regards to Disney, like Disney, you got to realize Disney used to get very obscure actors to do their voices, right?
Yeah.
They weren't looking for like a major star. They were just looking for somebody who fit the character.
That's right.
And I don't know why they moved away from that. Like, I mean, I guess I could probably take a guess, but I just think it's stupid. I think it's a shame that they did do that because...
Well, it's funny you bring up Aladdin, because from what I know, Aladdin was the beginning of what changed that, which was Robin Williams. And it went so well that they were like, hey, we could keep doing this. Yeah.
Yeah. That's actually a good point, because I'm trying to think of what other major star was doing voices in a Disney movie.
They would occasionally have a respected actor, but it was usually in movies that weren't Like there was a big kind of dark period with Disney where they're like, you know, I mean,
what's interesting too is they used to reuse a lot of actors too, right? Voice actors. So they, like, for instance, the guy who plays
Baloo,
the older dog. Oh yeah, that guy for sure. There's that voice actor, and then there was the guy who did the voice of the sheriff in Fox and the Hound. Or sorry, the sheriff in
Robin Hood.
Robin Hood was the same voice. He did a voice in Lady and the Tramp, and he did a voice in Fox and the Hound of the older dog.
Yep.
You know, you start to notice
you gotta
these
pay your taxes.
That guy.
No, it's you hear these voices. The guy who was the voice of Winnie the Pooh, he actually, you know, pops up in quite a lot of Disney animated voice work. So they would reuse, and that's well, God, this is a whole other tangent we could probably go into, not for this show, about voice actors.
Yeah, voice actors and Disney animation.
But kind of going back to Shredder, but more, well, not even really to Shredder, but the thing I wanted to kind of bring up, and this is kind of the thing I was going to kind of touch into maybe when I was talking about it at the beginning of the show. We were talking about how the slasher genre is kind of not a very respected subgenre in the horror category. And I think the reason why is because the slasher is kind of thought of as it's kind of the easiest. I mean, horror movies in general are kind of thought of as a good entry for filmmakers because they're very atmospheric. You can shoot them in one location. You don't need stars. But if you really want to make a simple horror movie, you do a slasher film. And that's why the 80s craze of slashers exploded so much. It's not that these people loved slasher movies. It was the cheapest way you could make a feature-length horror movie with little to no money.
You know what? As a testament to that, I will say that my friends and I made a short film in high school. It was like a half-hour film in high school that was based off of these slasher films that we were watching, you know, Miner's Massacre, and another one of them was called Sleepover Nightmare, a great classic that you must watch. Get together with your friends, watch that movie.
I love you're saying this as if our listeners don't already know these movies. These are classics.
I bet you a lot of them, you know, it's funny. They'd probably recognize them if they were in the video store and they saw them on the shelf, but most people probably didn't actually. They just weren't dumb enough to go rent them or bored enough or whatever.
Well, there was that period you could rent like 12 videos for like $5, I remember at one point. So, it's like, you throw it on the pile.
Well, exactly. You rent, I think it was like 6 movies for $5, 5 movies for $5.
Yeah.
I don't know. But, you know, we got into this habit of, let's actually watch this movie that is going to be obviously super shitty, but they were the funnest movies to watch. And so as I say, though, they were inspirational in the sense that we actually made a slasher film in high school. It was like grade 11, called Slicer, which anybody could go check this out. You could probably find it on YouTube if you type in Kevin Rosmer Slicer. I'm sure I have it uploaded there. Let me actually double check.
Is there like a dated year attached to it? So they could type in like Slicer.
Good question. If there was, it would be 2006. I'm gonna have to like go update the SEO on that or whatever, so that people can actually find that. Otherwise, maybe go look up Black Road Pictures YouTube channel, and you should be able to find it on there. Black Road Pictures, I think. And you should find it on one of those YouTube channels. Anyway, if you wanted to watch it, you could go watch it there. The movie is called Slicer, and it's in pretty rough quality, but check it out if you're curious. But we were inspired by these movies, and it's like, just as you say, it's an easy entry point for a filmmaker, right? Because it doesn't have to have a lot in terms of a complicated plot. You can film it in one location, not a lot of characters. You'd write in like some satisfying death scenes. One of the nice things about it too is it can help to expand your filmmaking, I guess. Like it sort of presents some challenges of, I don't know, you want to film a death scene and you want to have some fake blood, some simple special effects, stuff like that, you know? It gives you an opportunity to do some of that stuff. And it's a good thing to do as an experiment, I guess.
Yeah.
And we had a great time making that film. Like that was one of the the most memorable and top experiences from my teenage years was making that movie. And the wonderful thing is too, is we have that as a creative work that we can keep on looking back on again and again, and we can show it to other people. And like, you never go wrong when you create something.
Yeah.
Really.
And I think the thing that's kind of like the winning factor with the sort of like this slasher design is it's just like a winning concept. And like, even if it's done kind of badly, there's something that's engaging about presenting a bunch of characters and you kind of know that they're all doomed.
Yeah.
You know that they're pretty much all going to die.
It's not hard to make it somewhat entertaining.
Yeah. Well, you still know that someone's going to be the survivor and you don't really know who. I mean, unless it's so predictable that it's so obvious, but there's almost something even comforting about the, even if it's sort of stereotypical and you can predict what's going to happen, there's still something kind of comforting about knowing like, well, I know I'm going to see a bunch of characters just get, chopped up by some killer or whatever. I made my own little slasher movie, which was basically a Scream fan film. I made that when I was in like grade 8. And well, the nice thing about that one was that unlike a lot of the other slasher killers was that you could actually easily buy the Scream costume and it would be identical looking to the one in the movies.
Yeah, right. Because that was basically, I think that costume was...
It was a Halloween...
It was supposed to be a Halloween costume.
No, it was. Right? I remember seeing that costume in Halloween stores and costume stores for like a few years before Scream came out. And they consciously said that we wanted to grab something that you literally could have just grabbed out of a Halloween store, which is why they chose. Okay, personally, I'm actually not a big fan of the Ghostface killer as a design. I find him kind of lame. Maybe it's the fact that inside of the costume, I know it's just some like geeky teenager who gets hurt a lot, even when they're in the costume. It's not this like undead entity that's unstoppable.
Well, that's just it. Yeah, he's not. That is something I would say about the Scream killer is he's not nearly as intimidating as a what do you call him? I mean, a Freddy Krueger or a Jason or a Michael Myers.
Should we talk about Freddy Krueger? Because I know we haven't really talked about Freddy. We've talked about Jason, Michael Myers, and again, some people might even argue whether Freddy even counts as a slasher. I think he does. It's just that the rules are so unique for Freddy because there's so much supernatural elements that it's almost beyond. It's almost a slasher movie that goes so far beyond the basic realms because it kind of breaks the rules in that all these other slasher movies are very simple. You can do them with low budgets. You just need a mask and a knife. But because Freddy gets you in your dreams, Freddy also kind of falls into this fantasy horror kind of genre. And it's not like he has a knife. He's got claws and he's got all sorts of creative ways where he can kill you with your own fears. So he's not a slasher killer in that extent, but he gets lumped in with the rest because it was the 80s and he was a killer that was killing multiple teenagers in each movie.
And he was an icon.
And, but he was very different from Jason and Freddy he was very different from Jason and Michael Myers in that he didn't have a mask. He talked. Like he had far more personality than those other guys. And he was also,
to me, that actually makes him less intimidating. But
I agree. Yeah. Less intimidating, but also if he didn't talk, though, you would just be comparing him to Michael Myers and Jason. So I'm glad that he does talk.
Well, and it is cool that they did something different. And I think that a big part of what sells those movies is the concept, kind of the idea that you can't escape a dream and you're going to die in your dream. Like that's actually a really cool, interesting, and scary concept.
Yeah. Not only that, but it's like, you could... It's a bit of a mind fuck if it's like,
that's just it. There's a psychological component to it.
Well, what I mean is like you could have a nightmare about Michael Myers. You could have a nightmare about Jason chasing you. But if you're having a nightmare about Freddy chasing you, even if you somehow realize you're in a dream, you're like, well, fuck, this is Freddy. Yeah. This is what he does is he comes after you in his dreams. Yeah, so there's a weird meta kind of experience to that element too, where if you have a dream about Freddy, that's just that much more bizarre than any other kind of character you could have a nightmare about. But Freddy is almost the perfect example of that thing I was saying earlier about how, there would be kids who would watch the early Freddy movies and they'd be so scared of him. And then a lot of these kids, as they got older, they found a coping mechanism was to to try to relate to Freddy Krueger and be more on, and as the movies also reflected, it became more of a, oh, you're on Freddy's side. You're with him, kind of rooting for him to kill the kids and stuff like that. And so it's kind of, it's just kind of interesting. After a certain point, you're almost like, does this still even count as a horror movie? Because you're like, are you being scared, or are you kind of just,
well, that's just
you're kind of getting
right?
off on it, right?
Yeah.
And not that I'm saying there's anything wrong with that, but it's just interesting how there was that shift. Because I do kind of find that the first two Freddy movies are legitimately kind of, they're trying to be dark, scary movies. And then kind of from the third movie on is when he kind of starts becoming this wisecracking, kind of almost cartoony kind of character.
Oh, okay.
And it's you know, it probably would have been boring if you kept everything the same anyways.
Well, that's just it. You can only repeat yourself so many times.
Yeah.
Eh?
I think the problem was that they just started making him, after a certain point, he got too cartoony.
Yeah.
And it became
yeah.
all about the wisecracks.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, the thing is, too, is, man, those early movies, they were so creative in terms of special effects and how they depicted these dream sequences and stuff. And, you know, like I always think of that moment where she's walking down the stairs and kind of sinking into the stairs.
Yeah.
It was just a really cool effect.
Yeah, yeah.
It's very dreamlike or whatever, but it was also really visual and interesting to see on film. Like that makes it like real cinematic artistry, you know?
Yeah. Well, they took a really great horror movie cliche, which was, it was just a dream. You know, there's so many horror movies where you see a horrific incident and then they wake up and it's a dream.
Yeah.
And so Freddy was able to just fill that up with those moments, and it didn't feel forced because that literally was what it was about. It was about those dreams. So you weren't kind of like, oh, you cheated me with some lame dream sequence.
To be the surprise or the twist or whatever.
It's almost more you watch those movies, and every time you're watching a scene, you could be thinking, well, wait, is this a dream too? You know?
Yeah. Well, and the fact that it is a dream doesn't mean you're safe too.
Yeah. Yeah. Do we want to, should we try to jump into any other kind of like obscure slasher movies?
Yeah. Can you think of some other ones?
I mean, there's definitely a lot that are just kind of like, I've seen quite a lot of like the problem is like, there's so many in the 80s that are just kind of like by the numbers, you know?
Yeah.
You're like, I could mention these movies, but whether I want to recommend them or feel like they're worth talking about, I mean, I don't know. We could talk about the Hellraiser franchise, but even though I guess I could throw that into the category, Hellraiser is there's so much more to it than a slasher thing that maybe Pinhead and Hellraiser might be better suited for a different horror podcast.
Yeah.
But I mean, Candyman is another one that they lump in, you know, with those guys usually.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know if you've seen Candyman, but
no. But I am trying to think of, I'm kind of trying to think of more ones from the late 90s, early 2000s. Was Jeepers Creepers a slasher film? I never did see
wouldn't
that
call
either.
Jeepers Creepers a slasher,
I
but
never
it
did
wasn't.
see it.
But
I just remember it being like a movie that came.
It's
about
good. I mean, I would
around
definitely recommend it. The first one I quite like. It's just a shame that it's directed by a pedophile, but but even the second movie is actually not too shabby. Yeah, no, I quite enjoy Jeepers. The thing I like about Jeepers Creepers is just they create a whole lot of lore to a thing that was just like to the first movie. Like they build the world and the character very well. It was I'd say Jeepers Creepers is very iconic, even if it's not a slasher thing. It was a very original movie that it's totally worth watching. Yeah.
Hey, by the way, if you're out there and you're listening, let us know in our comments if you think there's some movies that we should talk about, that we should know about. Maybe there's some there are some obscure slasher films that you know about that we haven't mentioned or that we should talk about or that we should see. We'd love to hear them because we're always looking to find new material and stuff. I mean, like I mentioned, Shredder and Miner's Massacre, definitely check those out. But if you're a person who maybe knows of some obscure stuff, like we'd love to hear it too, because we're always looking to broaden our horizons, and maybe that would be interesting to talk about as well on our podcast and give some commentary on.
And we're streaming this live, so just call into the toll-free number. It should just be at the bottom of the screen.
We need a toll-free number.
You can call right now. And what's
sure
that? No,
it's
we
probably,
don't. Yeah.
It's probably easier than ever to set up a toll-free number.
Yeah,
but
it's
that would be cool if we could have some live streaming going on. Maybe one day we'll live stream some of these.
We're recording in September, but it's probably October if you're hearing this. But I don't know. Yeah, maybe. Depending on where this is posted, maybe you can respond in the comments section if you have any questions or requests, or maybe we will in the future do some real live shows and people can come in with their own I don't know, slasher movies or other movies that they think are worth noting.
Yeah. Otherwise, I'm sitting here. I'm trying to think of like what else was on the shelves in the video store back in those days. Stuff that I never got to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've covered a lot. I mean, we've covered a good deal of the 90s ones. I mean, there's a ton of the 80s we haven't covered, but a lot of them are these kind of like one-off movies. And
why don't you just throw a few titles out there?
Oh God. Well, let me try and think. I mean, there's Slumber Party Massacre. There's like
Sleepaway Camp. That was
that's actually, you know what? I'm so glad you said that. You've seen Sleepaway Camp?
I've seen the first one.
Okay. I've seen the first one and the third one. And yeah, it seems like the first one's the only one worth watching.
Well, again, what a worthwhile movie. Yeah.
So that was a movie that I bought for like $4 in like a Walmart bin. I bought it before ever seeing it. I heard of the Sleepaway Camp title. I'm like, oh, this is like one of those kind of classic titles that I just never got around to seeing. So I just took a chance. And while I was watching it, I was like, this might be one of the worst slasher movies I've ever seen. I was almost thinking, is this intentionally supposed to be this bad? Like maybe it's actually meant to be a comedy. I want
to know what era that's actually from, because
it's from the early 80s. Well, early to mid 80s.
I thought it was something like that.
But I was watching
83.
And I was just thinking, I was just like, is this just meant to be, am I just not in on the joke? I didn't understand how this movie was a classic. And Sleepaway Camp might be the ultimate example of why you don't give up on a movie. Why you don't turn it off midway through and you follow it through, because you just never know if it's, maybe it's going to deliver in the end. Because that's what that movie is it's this, it kind of trolls you into just thinking you're watching this terrible, almost parody of slasher movies. And then it just kind of hits you with this 180 ending that is so different from the rest of the movie that it makes it that much more disturbing. And then you're like, that's why this movie is so famous. I don't know. We don't have to get into the twist or anything like that, but the twist is enough to, if you can get through the rest of the movie, it's worthwhile to get to the ending. I don't know. I wouldn't bother with the sequels, but watch the first Sleepaway Camp. That's like a great example of kind of maybe a bit of a forgotten slasher movie that's worthwhile.
Yeah.
Also, if you just like camp movies, like it's got that kind of Friday the 13th vibe. Like if you like summer camp horror slashers, Sleepaway Camp is up there. If we're going to just talk about really random obscure ones, here's kind of one that's I think very few people would know, because it's like this little it's another little like Canadian slasher movie from the early 80s, and it's a movie called Curtains. And I don't even know why I'm bringing it up, because I don't really have a whole lot to say about it.
I haven't heard of it.
It's got that real 80s Canadian vibe to it, but it's like, it's neat. It's not amazing, but I was kind of like, why is this movie not more well known? I can't remember if the killer always wears the same mask, but there's one particular kill where he's kind of just wearing it's like he's wearing like a very realistic latex mask of almost like an old woman with like long stringy hair. And he's on like an outdoor ski, like ice rink. It's very Canadian, but he's just like kind of like going after this girl with like just like a big sickle, I guess. Is that what the word is?
Okay.
And like that's the kind of the thing that really sticks out. And I don't know, if you're looking for like a really random Canadian slasher horror movie, you might enjoy Curtains. I don't know. I'll try to think of others if they pop up in my head. I've seen so many, but so many of them just kind of blend together. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's Slaughter High. There's April Fool's Day. There's
and
they were just busting these out. Yeah.
And then of course there's been like some remakes over the years. Wasn't like what's it called? The Babysitter. Is that a slasher film?
I think there was a movie called The Babysitter. I know it's like
it was actually a slasher film.
I never saw it, but I think it's like a kind of like a horror comedy or something. So is the idea that the babysitter is the killer?
I don't know.
Or is she being maybe she's being hunted by a killer?
I haven't seen it.
But yeah. Maybe that's the topic we should try to think of, is like, what are some can we think of any like very recent slasher movies? Like, I almost feel like anything that comes out now that's a slasher movie is like, it almost has to be retooled into something like where it's like partially a slasher movie, but it's very rare to just get like a bare bones slasher movie. It's almost like a very new, clever way of creating a scenario where you're going to see a whole bunch of like body counts happen.
Yeah.
But not in the way of kind of the older 80s, 90s slashers that we've been talking about.
Well, and there's so many movies in the last decade that I just haven't watched because I've been like,
yeah. I think the last recent slasher movie I saw was the movie X, which I can't quite remember the director's name, but he's made a lot of sort of newer horror movies of the last decade. And I don't know. I'm going to be honest. I wasn't really a big fan of X, but I was really a big fan of. They made directly after X. They made the prequel to X, which is a movie called Pearl, which I don't regard as a slasher movie, but it was my favorite movie of last year. So I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. I guess it just kind of shows like maybe I'm just not the biggest slasher fan, because I wasn't crazy about X, but I loved the movie Pearl. But X is like set in the 70s. It's about a small kind of indie film crew making like an indie porno movie. And then at the location they're at, they kind of start dying out. And it's got a lot of style to it. But I just didn't connect to it the way I did with Pearl. But I don't know. That might be a movie that our viewers, if they want to look for something like a newer kind of slasher movie, they might want to check X out.
You know what is a movie that did a bit of a twist on a lot of the slasher tropes? Was The Cabin in the Woods. Oh, because it kind of starts out as a slasher movie, right? Yeah. If I'm not mistaken.
Well, it's like it almost covers in a weird way, like Cabin in the Woods almost covers almost every horror genre, but within the context of the slasher being a premise where it's a bunch of young kids and they're all going to die one by one, and it really kind of just plays on that idea. Yeah, Cabin in the Woods was a really neat one. Yeah,
and that was, let me just see here. That came out in 2012.
Yeah,
I thought it was a little more recent than that, but wow.
Funny enough, I remember that was a movie that was filmed way before it was released, because I had a couple of friends who worked on the crew of that, and they were telling me about it, and it was hard for me to believe it. They were just like. A buddy of mine, he was just like, just mention like a monster. And I'm like, what? Like any monster? And I can't remember what I said, but I said it. He's like, yep, it's in the movie. He's like, every monster is in this movie. And I was just like, come on. Like, you're not every monster.
Yeah.
But I understand what he meant.
Were you living here then? 2012?
Yeah. I was here when that happened. So I think they actually shot that movie around, like 2010 or something like that. Well, no, let me put it this way. When they made that movie, what's his face, who played Thor, he was not yet cast as Thor, but that movie came out after the Thor movie. Well, at least after the first Thor movie, maybe even after the first Avenger.
Wait, you mean the Hemsworth brother?
Yeah, that was Chris Hemsworth made that before he was in the Marvel universe.
Wow.
And I don't know why it took. Maybe there was a really long post production, or they just wanted to really time the release carefully. But I remember I was waiting years for Cabin in the Woods because of the guys I know who worked on it. And I was just like, what? I was like, is this movie even going to come out? Is this like a fake movie? And then, yeah, it finally did come out. And I was just sort of like, oh yeah. And like, sure. I mean, there's characters that they couldn't get the rights to, but there's certain, you watch the movie and you're like, okay, that's supposed to be Pinhead. That's supposed to be Pennywise the clown. Yeah, no, I thought it was, again, I mean, it's very hard for me to get scared by most modern movies, but I thought Cabin in the Woods was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really watch horror films these days to be scared, but more so to feel good. I like them as these feel good movies.
Get that visceral reaction, you
I
know?
know, man. Yeah, there's just, I like being in that atmosphere, that dark, like, kind of gloomy atmosphere where everything's like scary and uneasy and stuff like that. Just calms me.
Yeah.
All right, it's time for us to do our top 10 breakdown slasher films. Now, we've probably talked about most of these, but hopefully we've got some on our lists that we haven't brought up yet. What have you got on yours, Oliver?
I guess maybe the best way to do it is I'll give you my number 10. You give me your number 10, and maybe we just go back and forth down our lists, maybe?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I have for number 10, and this is actually, I'm glad I have this here because I don't think I was bringing this title up earlier. My number 10 slasher movie is a movie called The Burning, and this came out in like 1981, and for a lot of people, this movie is kind of like known as the Jewish Friday the 13th. Just in that, like a lot of the actors who play camp counselors in the movie happen to be Jewish, and I think same with like a lot of like the makers of the film. I guess I have to throw this in there. This was basically the like movie that broke the Weinstein brothers into the film industry. So yeah, Harvey Weinstein's kind of first real indie movie was this film. He didn't they didn't direct it, but they produced it. I this was probably before Miramax was a thing. This was one of the things that led to them later having Miramax. And
so when was it made then?
This was like 1981. So this was like, some people would also kind of think of it as, well, like, okay, I said the Jewish Friday the 13th movie because it was kind of a bit of a clone. They hired even Tom Savini, Tom Savini is a very well-known movie makeup artist, and he did all of the effects for the original Friday the 13th, and they wanted to bring him back for Friday the 13th Part 2, but he decided to do this movie instead. Both movies are kind of like made in kind of like the New Jersey area, I'm pretty sure. But the thing about The Burning is it's like actually based on an actual like famous urban legend character of New Jersey called, I believe the character is called Cropsey. I think there's even like documentaries on this character. This has been like a urban legend of a guy that goes back way before like the 70s, I think even. And they decided to basically use that whole urban legend as the basis of the character who's the killer in The Burning. And basically Cropsey, they use his name too. It's the same, they use that as the killer's name. And so at the very beginning of the movie, he gets badly burned, hence The Burning. And then the rest of the movie, he's this disfigured guy who's out on the rampage going after teenagers. The cool thing about the movie is there's actually like a few people in the movie who kind of later went on to be pretty famous. Jason Alexander. It's one of Jason Alexander's first movies where he plays one of the camp counselors. Okay. It's got a young Holly Hunter as one of the camp counselors. And the thing I was going to say, part of the reason why I'd put this movie on the list is that this movie kind of did something that I find not a lot of slashers do, which was that it really takes its time in letting you get to know the teenage characters, and it doesn't really have like the typical group of like a bunch of like douchebags who you want to look forward to seeing killed. Yeah. They actually do a good job of making the kids very like wholesome and very like likable.
That is kind of unusual, isn't it?
And so, yeah, when they actually do end up getting killed, you like genuinely feel bad. Like you don't want to see it happening to them. And so that was kind of like one of the things I remember that was kind of like the most unique about this movie. And so, yeah, I don't know if you're a fan of the Friday the 13th movies and you've kind of just seen them all and you're looking for, another kind of summer camp slasher, I'd say watch Sleepaway Camp or The Burning. So that's my number 10.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. The Burning. I'm going to have to add that to my list because, might as well kind of get more cultured on some of these things. The Burning. Sorry, when did you say that?
I think it's like 1981.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, quite a long time ago. That's what I discovered in looking up a bunch of slasher films is there's so many that I haven't seen from different years, and it just makes me want to go and watch a whole bunch of these, which I won't mention or talk about right now because it'd just be too much, and I wouldn't have a lot to say about them. But they seem like, again, if you're judging a movie by its cover or by the screenshots, I'm like, damn, I would probably really like to watch some of these. There's a whole bunch.
Yeah, even some like the bad slasher movies have really great, like nifty covers. I guess that's, that was like the selling point for a lot of them. But
well, especially in the 80s, it's like that was the era of great movie posters, movie covers. But then you watch the movie and it doesn't live up to the poster.
Yeah. And yet the covers, like they look... Most of them just all looked equally as good. You just almost couldn't tell until you rented it.
Yeah, especially for like fantasy movies and stuff. I feel like we've kind of lost that the art of the movie cover a little bit. But anyway, well, for my number 10, I did put Shredder. I don't have to talk about it anymore, but I put it on there because I'm like, okay, I know this movie sucks, but it means something to me. It's an important film. It was influential, and it is hilarious. It succeeds tremendously as a comedy, and again, it's got a lot of the great tropes of a classic slasher film. Just worth watching if you get together with some friends and want to have a laugh. Shredder is my number 10.
Nice. I still gotta well, now I feel like I have to watch Shredder.
Well, maybe we should sit down and have a Shredder night, or we'll watch like a couple of different things.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay, well, number 9. I guess I'll give you my number 9, and then you can come back. Number 9 is Valentine. And again, we talked about it reasonable amount already. Again, this to me was probably like the first real R-rated slasher film that I can think of watching, and maybe that's why it sticks out so well in my memory, is I had this experience of coming to the genre watching this movie. And again, I think classic masked killer with a knife. In fact, there's a lot of actually decent kills in the movie, decent creative kills. He doesn't just kill people with a knife, but just being introduced to the concept of that intimidating figure, sort of dead, faceless kind of character, was it just made quite an impression on me. So I'm going to put that in there as my number 9. But it is admittedly not the greatest movie. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense and that is kind of far-fetched in terms of the plot and whatnot. But
yeah, I still I've not seen Valentine yet, so they'll
that's amazing. It's so rare that I've seen these movies that you haven't seen.
Oh no, you'll be
so we're going to watch Shredder, we're going to watch Valentine.
Yeah, no, and I bet if we go further down our list, we'll probably discover that there's probably there might be a number of movies on your list that maybe I haven't seen.
Yeah.
But
just you might want to lean in more him, right?
Yeah, all right. So I guess I'll go in with my number 9 now, and this was a movie I was talking about a little bit earlier. I guess this was the movie that I kind of thought of as kind of like the first really like kind of official sort of slasher movie, as far as one that just kind of had all of the tropes and cliches. So my number 9 title is Blood and Black Lace. That's the Giallo slasher by Mario Bava, made in 1964. There's probably a lot of other slashers I probably could have put in that I'd seen more times and maybe in some ways might even enjoy more than this one, but I felt I had to put this on the list mainly just for its importance, to the slasher genre overall. And it is a good little movie. It's a little bit, there's just a lot of melodramatic sequences with a lot of kind of, I don't know, exposition with a lot of characters that you kind of don't really care about, that kind of slows down the movie a bit. But I think like, yeah, the kills kind of make up for a lot of it. It's got great cinematography, and yeah, just kind of, I had to put it down as just kind of being like one of the first real official slasher films.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one that I'm going to have to watch, and I added it to my list. But sounds like it's worth checking out. You want to jump into your number 8 there then?
Oh, yeah. I guess that's, yeah. So for number 8, I put, so this is the only Friday the 13th movie that I have on my list, and it's not the first one. I put down Friday the 13th, the final chapter, which is part 4. I don't know if you've seen.
I have seen that
Oh,
one.
you have? Oh, okay.
And it is funny that you put a Friday the 13th movie that was not the first one either, because I also have one at some point on my list that is not the first one, too.
I'm glad to hear it's not the first one. Nothing against the first one. It's just, yeah. If you've seen them all, guys, I think we can agree the first one's definitely not the best one.
Yeah.
But I guess let me try and explain maybe why number 4 is just maybe my overall favorite of the franchise. So it brought back Tom Savini, the famous effects artist who did the first movie. And from what I know is the real only reason that they brought him back was that they promised him that this would be his opportunity to kill off Jason for good. And we all know how that went. You know, they did like, 6 or 7 movies later with more Jason. But the effects are particularly, I thought, good in this one. I like the cast in this one. You've got a young Corey Feldman in the movie. You've also got Crispin Glover.
I forgot Corey Feldman was in there.
Yeah. And he plays Tommy Jarvis, who's one of the few reoccurring characters in the Friday the 13th franchise. And it's just, for me, it's kind of just got a lot of like the sort of like rewatchability. It's kind of right in the middle of the franchise when they were really kind of just starting to kind of really understand how to use Jason properly.
Right.
And I don't know. It's not like a lot of the Friday the 13th are summer camp movies, and this one isn't. This one's more just kind of like, there's a family in kind of a cabin in the woods, and then across from them there's like a cabin of teenagers that show up. But I don't know, for some reason, because of that, I feel like you kind of get to know these characters a little bit more than you do in some of the other Friday the 13th movies. And I don't know, the acting seems a little bit better. Like I don't think the writing's really any particularly better. The story's not all that different from the other ones, but just a lot of things just kind of came together on this one that worked.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. Yeah, as we go through your list, I'm curious to know what your one, which one yours is going to be.
It is funny because I was wrestling with this one. I was considering putting part 4 on there as well, the final chapter.
How many Friday the 13th have you seen altogether?
I think I've seen the first 5 or 6.
Okay.
And then there's a bunch that I haven't seen. I haven't seen like Jason Goes to. Let me even.
I mean, 7. I would say 7 is definitely worth watching, and maybe watch 8 just to complete the 80s part of the franchise. But after 8, it gets kind of rough.
I feel like the 80s movies are worth watching, and maybe it's just because I love 80s movies, and so it kind of has that 80s magic that's in there. But again, I like the first 2 Friday the 13th movies. They're not my favorite, largely because they're missing the iconography. But I still feel like that whole decade, because the first one came out in 1980.
Yep.
Pretty sure. All those 80s movies are worth watching to me because, I don't know, I just love the 80s, man.
Yeah, no,
it's that
and
80s vibe.
Unlike a lot of the other slasher franchises, there's like and this is what some people could criticize about the Jason movies, is that they're not really all that different from each other, but that's actually kind of what I like about them, is like they're very consistent.
Yeah. Well, especially for that decade though, too, right? Because afterward, then maybe you start to they started to change a little bit in terms of the style or the...
the last 80s one, which is Jason Goes to Manhattan, that's kind of when they jumped the shark. It still is, I kind of still enjoy it compared to a lot of the ones that came after it.
Yeah.
But because number 8, that's the first time where they kind of really do take him away from the campgrounds. Like he's no longer in the woods. He's on a boat. And I think they filmed it in Vancouver. So,
really?
Vancouver, it's the Vancouver curse, we ruined it.
So supposed to be was not a good movie.
No, I used to love it a lot as a kid, and I didn't realize that it was like one of the most hated ones in the series. And then as I got older, I realized I was like, no, this really is terrible. But there was something
because the concept of Jason going to Manhattan actually sounds like a fun concept to me.
Well, that's the thing is I think a lot of people assume that he would be in Manhattan within the first 20 minutes of the movie. It takes like over an hour before he gets to Manhattan. Like the movie is on a cruise ship, and that's what the movie is. And by the time he does get to Manhattan, they don't even really do a whole lot with that. Again, funny enough, like that's when you really start seeing a lot of the Vancouver shots is when he's in Vancouver.
Yeah.
Or sorry, when he's supposed to be in New York.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. Well, yeah, on that note, my number 8 is Black Christmas. And I think this is a worthy movie for putting on here just because it sort of set the stage for kind of what became like the kind of set the stage for what slasher films would be from then on since. I think it's got a great vibe. The performances are quite authentic. I was actually just rewatching a little bit of it the other night to kind of prime myself for this. And there's something about just when those opening credits come up and the entire vibe that I get from the movie, the atmosphere and it all taking place in this kind of creepy sorority house. Like, it has that old mansion-y sort of vibe.
Yeah.
And
I've actually been to that sorority house.
I was going to ask you if you've ever like checked that out because it's in Toronto, right?
Yeah.
Or is it in Hamilton or something?
No, it's in Toronto. Like I think almost the whole thing was filmed in Toronto.
I want to go check that out.
Yeah, I used to work in what was the police station, which got converted into a community center. But the location which used to actually be an actual police station. So yeah, like I spent like a couple of summers working in that the police station that's used in Black Christmas.
Oh man, that's cool.
And I love this movie. This is the first movie that is on both of our lists.
Right.
So I won't talk about it when it gets to mine, but I mean, I love this movie so much it made it to spot number 3.
Oh, okay.
For me.
Well, that ruins spot number 3 for us now. But anyway.
Well, because I'm not going to talk about Black Christmas later on. I might as well just get it out now. But yeah, no, it's. I remember like as a kid, a lot of my friends were kind of like, "Oh, this is like a genuinely like scary one," and we're all like, "Really? Okay." And then, sure enough, yeah, like we were like, "Yep, that's definitely one of the scariest ones." And like even as like another like 20 years or so has gone by. It's neat, like seeing younger people now check out the movie, and even they, after watching it, they're like, "That was one of the scariest movies I've seen." And so it's still like really effective, and it just shows like if you do like a quality horror movie, it can age pretty well and keep scaring people.
Yeah, definitely. It does age pretty well, and I think I watched it for the first time in maybe the mid 2010s, maybe the earlier 2010s, but being quite impressed by it and. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about it, but definitely worthy spot on there.
I used to work at a radio station, and I had I was able to get onto our show Nick Mancuso, who is this Canadian actor who did the voice of the obscene phone calls in Black Christmas.
Oh, really?
You don't see him in the movie, but he was the one doing all of the like real, and as I thought was like one of the really creepy like it was not like a corny, cheesy 70s kind of prank call. You're like, that does seem like an actual lunatic on the other end there.
Well, and one of the things that I should actually add that I like about the movie in regards to what I was talking about with kind of these genuine performances, I really like Margot Kidder in this movie.
Yeah.
Because she's this really kind of sassy... She's not at all creeped out by the phone calls or whatever.
From what I know is that's like the closest character that she played to herself, like at that time in her life, like of all of the characters she played, like that's kind of the truest to what Margot Kidder was kind of like from the things I've read and heard.
Well, she does it so naturally, you know, and I don't know. I just think that's it's kind of a better approach, or it's a less cliche approach or a less obvious approach than just having somebody be scared and panicking.
Yeah. I also
crying,
like that
whatever.
they gave her character, they made her character asthmatic. So it's like, even though she was this kind of like, sort of like tough, bitchy character who could kind of handle herself and not be afraid of things, they also still kind of gave her this this kind of weakness or flaw that kind of still made her very like vulnerable in other ways.
Yeah, and she smokes cigarettes.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Just like this contradiction there. But yeah, no, I think that her in the context of the other sorority sisters, it's just a nice dynamic that ends up going on with the characters.
Yeah.
Staying in the house. But yeah, okay. So number 7 for me is Psycho, the classic Hitchcock Psycho, and I am gonna have to watch the second one now.
Yeah, I think you'll like it. It's surprisingly good, the second one. I don't know about the others. I haven't seen the other ones, but
I think this movie it's like bound to make an impression on a person. And again, even after so many years, right? Because I didn't watch it until the early 2010s, I think, as well. So it was maybe like 2013 or 2014 that I finally watched it, I think.
Okay, so yeah, I'm glad
it still has an impact on you, even if when you know what a lot of this stuff is going to be that happens, the surprising moments or whatever. It just packs a punch to it, and I think it's a classic for a reason, and it's remembered for a reason. And actually, another thing is just even being in black and white, it's still thrilling to watch, because oftentimes black and white movies can be a little bit harder to enjoy, but I almost kind of feel like the black and white maybe even kind of adds an element of creepiness to it.
Yeah, it's so Psycho's on my list too. I have it higher up, and I almost maybe feel like I shouldn't, just because it's not like the body count isn't quite high enough, for it to be like a true slasher movie, but it kind of started it all.
That's one of the reasons I kind of bring it down a little bit of a notch.
Yeah.
It's not as classic as the types that I really like, but
I'm glad that you kind of, you saw it sort of a little bit later than I had thought. And it was still obviously effective to you, because, that's such a famous and referenced movie that I sometimes like worry, does it really have the effect on people when
it's or is it just going to be ruined for people because they've heard about it so many times, or it's been kind of spoiled through pop culture references?
I was, I guess, fairly young when I saw it. I don't think it was the first Hitchcock movie I saw, but it was definitely one of the early ones. Like, I think I bought the VHS probably when I was like 10 or 11 or something like that.
Well, that must have spooked the hell out of you then.
No, because I was like even at that point, it just felt so much tamer than a lot of the other things I had seen. So that was the thing, was that actually Psycho didn't really scare me all that much. Like, when it's the intense scenes, I was definitely, found those scenes kind of like invigorating and stuff. But I wasn't overly. I'm trying to think maybe what would be the most disturbing thing for me with. I mean, in some ways, it's the music. The music's kind of what, in some ways, makes it like the most effective, like the shrieking string instruments, and maybe like. I mean, I guess I think we're assuming that our viewers, even if they haven't seen a lot of these movies, I think it's safe to say most people know the Psycho story. So I don't think I'm ruining anything about Norman Bates' mom in the cellar.
I don't think we should worry about spoilers in this in our podcast.
Yeah, but that was kind of like one of like the true kind of like genuinely kind of like horrific kind of moments in the movie.
Well, exactly. Yeah, kind of the end reveal, right?
Yeah,
and that's kind of what I meant in terms of it being this shocking, weird moment, even again after seeing it as old as I was in my mid-20s and stuff.
If there's one major flaw I feel about Psycho, is it's actually it's not the last scene, because I actually think the last scene almost kind of repairs the flaw that's just before it by being such a really good ending. I love the ending where it's Norman Bates in the cellar and there's like the internal monologue where you hear the mother speaking. That scene is great. Like, that's a great way to end it. But it's the sequence right before that where you get this like inspector who's never shown up earlier in the movie. And he just kind of appears and gives a giant monologue, essentially to the viewer, explaining what you just saw. Because in 1960s, like, just I guess we've come a long way. Like in 1960s, like you kind of needed someone to explain, just what split personality was and stuff like that. So that's the only part that I feel is really kind of aged the movie quite a bit. But other than that, like I think it's a pretty solid movie. So.
It's classic bad Hitchcock ending.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I always feel like a lot of his movies, they end too abruptly or they end in some dissatisfying way.
I do know that Psycho. Sorry, go on. Yeah.
And so if, in that case, it's like, hey, if a bad ending is a Hitchcock staple, it's like it remains consistent with.
Well, even like a lot of good old movies in general, I find sometimes just have awkward endings where the movie just kind of ends on like a joke, and then all of a sudden, like it's fading out, and you're like, whoa, that's the end.
Yeah.
But
there's no sort of resolution, which I like it when a movie has kind of a bit of a wind down, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think in some ways, a lot of the things about Psycho turning out the way it did was kind of almost by accident, because Psycho could have been a really different movie. From what I know is Psycho was made really quickly and really cheaply for a Hitchcock movie at that time. And he basically shot it with his television crew who were filming the Alfred Hitchcock Presents episodes.
Wow.
And that's partly also, I think, why Psycho was shot in black and white. I think it was maybe partly for the look, but it was actually Alfred Hitchcock's first black and white movie in some time. And there's a good chance that it might have just been done for...
actually, yeah. Because considering it's 1960, it's like it feels older than that because of the fact that it's black and white.
And I think it was just for budgetary reasons. They just kind of like made this thing very quickly in the way that the television episodes were made.
That's really interesting.
And
I'm going to have to go read about that in my Truffaut on Hitchcock. I don't know. I have this book that's like an interview between Francois Truffaut and Hitchcock.
I too had that book, and it's a great one.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't read all of it, so I didn't get around to the Psycho part yet, but I should go check that out because I imagine you get a lot of that background,
Yeah. No, if anyone who's like, if they're a really big, if you're a fan of Alfred Hitchcock, like that's probably like one of, if not like maybe like the best book to really get like an in-depth interview of Hitchcock, because it's a famous French director asking him a lot of, very kind of sort of like unique, interesting questions that, maybe only another filmmaker could think of. And it's very long, but it's like really, they go into depth, like into like most of his important movies. Like they go into a lot of detailed stuff.
Well, and a lot of like important decisions that went into the directing of these things. Like, why did you choose to shoot the sequence like this?
Yeah.
That's what's so fascinating about it to me. And so even they go back to like his earliest work, which is...
And I don't know how far back he started doing it, but it seems like fairly early on, he was a guy who was... it's definitely in his later movies, which was that he would meticulously storyboard the entire movie. So by the time like they would shoot it, there was almost not even all that much to do. It's like he almost kind of already did his work. But that's just how methodically planned out his movies are.
Well, it's a good idea, I think. I mean, if I was, I guess, had more patience or more drawing ability, I would probably do that. Because then at least if you know that it works on paper, then, the directing's already kind of... It would probably make things a lot easier when you show up on set and you're like, okay, now we're just doing this shot and then that shot. And...
That's how I used to think a lot of movies were made, and then I found out no, like that's not it at all. They do all this extra coverage and everything, but yeah, if you have a really strong vision, you can get away with shooting more or less what you need to, and knowing that it's going to work.
Yeah. Okay. Did we talk about your number 7?
No. So my number 7. I'm almost wondering if I want to change this, because the movie I have for number 7 I really like, but it's a movie that I don't know. I've only seen it once, and it wasn't that long ago. And I'm not sure if I'll have a lot to say about it. While there's some other movies I could probably talk a lot more about, but whatever. I put this for my number 7, so I'll just try to get through it a bit. It's not probably as serious as the other movies. In fact, probably the reason I have it on the list is because it's a fairly kind of unintentionally funny slasher movie. And I think, yeah, well, I guess a lot of the slasher movies kind of came out in the early 80s. And this one was, I think might actually be like a European production, but it's like it's dubbed or it's performed in English, but it doesn't feel like this is an American slasher movie. And it's called Pieces. And it's just this is a movie that I'd kind of been hearing about for some time, and it was just kind of one of those slasher movies that slipped by me. And I think I saw some clips from this movie. It was on a compilation of like some of like the most terrible over the top acting compilations, and it wasn't even like a murder sequence. It was just like a woman's reaction, and it was from this movie. And I was just sort of like, okay, I need to see this film. This just seems like a cult classic. And I honestly can't even really remember a lot of like the details as far as the plot, as far as like, why the killer's doing it.
When did you watch it?
This was probably maybe like 2 years ago. I feel like I watched this like right when it was like, right in the middle of like the, COVID lockdowns.
Yeah. Okay.
And
that's one of the things too, I find, is that usually I will not retain a lot of a movie on just a single watch. Right. So
yeah,
if I watch it for the first time just once, I'm not going to remember a whole lot about it if I don't rewatch it a time or two.
Yeah. This seemed like I watched it by myself because of COVID, but this actually seems like the perfect kind of movie to watch with like a bunch of friends, like, I don't know, having some beers or something. Cause it's just, I think it'd almost be more memorable because there's a whole lot of scenes in this movie that are kind of ridiculous that you'd get a lot of great group reactions to. I bet you could make a drinking game out of this movie. But yeah,
well, maybe
but
we
anyway,
should do that. You and Sean and I should do that.
yeah. But
do you mind throwing me that cushion over there?
Yeah.
Thanks.
And so, yeah, obviously, I guess it wasn't the most memorable movie for me, but the thing I remembered most was just, it was like very entertaining. It was a very enjoyable movie. And I remembered it had just been quite a long time since I saw like just a really enjoyable slasher movie. So,
well, and hopefully it'll be a new title for people who are listening and maybe inspire them to want to go watch it. What year is it from?
I want to say maybe like 1982, maybe 1983. It's definitely like, it's pretty gory.
1982 slasher film.
I remember it being pretty gory. For a movie called Pieces, I think, you do see a lot of like limbs detached and stuff like that. Yeah. But it's just the acting, and I think, just like some of like this, I think most of the characters are kind of like dubbed over, and you just kind of, when you add it all together, you just kind of get a bit of a goofy movie. But
goofy movie. Yeah, that's another one.
Yeah, it's probably the most of everything on my list. It's probably the one that's the most fun of the movies. All the other ones I think are trying to kind of be somewhat legitimate horror movies.
Okay, gotcha.
So that's my number 7. Should I go on to number 6? Yep. Or is
What's
that
your
how we're doing,
number 6?
So this is a movie I might have talked about earlier tonight, but so it's another giallo Italian slasher movie. This one's from the early 70s. Mm-hmm. The thing I like about this movie is it's actually got like it's got like a notorious number of titles. So
okay, because it's foreign, hey?
Yeah, it just got distributed with a bunch of different titles. When I bought this movie when I was fairly young, because there was this kind of bootleg VHS marketplace where I was able to just find a lot of very obscure horror movies, and I would just snatch these things up. And so the one I got was called Bay of Blood. It's also known as, this is my more preferred title, Twitch of the Death Nerve. Some places it was listed as Last House on the Left Part 2, which is funny because it actually came out before Last House on the Left. But it's not really anything that crazy of a slasher movie. I guess this might have been the first giallo horror movie I saw. It's also directed by Mario Bava, who did Blood and Black Lace. But the thing I like about this movie is that this was in particular probably like the Italian slasher movie that had more influence on the 80s slashers than anything.
Oh, okay.
There are certain deaths in this movie that have been shot for shot recreated in some of the Friday the 13th movies. In the second Friday...
Stealing from the best.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember in the second movie, there's a part where there's like a couple of teens having sex, and Jason comes out and he has a spear and he just impales it right through both of them.
Yeah, yep.
And it like, everything from the shot of like the arrow just like hitting the bottom of the floor of the bed. It's like, it's a shot for shot remake. And, like it's probably like the first slasher movie that just has like a really high body count. Like I think there's a good, like 16 people who get killed in this movie. And it still kind of has like the who done it. You're not really sure who the killer is, but it's one of the main characters. And it's got a nice little twist ending. I used even some of the soundtrack music for an old horror movie I'd made a while back. Not really sure what else to say about Bay of Blood, other than it's like a really kind of great early 70s slasher to see. A movie that influenced a lot of later 80s movies. Mm-hmm. So that's my list for number 7. Or is that 6? Is that my 6?
That was number 6, actually. Yeah. Okay, number 6 on mine is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The first one, I'm going to say, which I, again, sort of regrettably at this point have not seen, any of the other ones. The only other one that I've seen is the 2003 remake, which was kind of enjoyable as well. I don't know, being a teenager when that came out. But the first one I do find to be, I don't know, I get, maybe it's just the whole concept of a chainsaw massacre, which is just so horrifying, and the character of Jason, that freaky family. But I really do want to watch these other like the one from 1986, 1990, 1994. I don't know. Maybe it's just because these covers look so creepy as well. Have you seen any of the other ones?
Yeah, I've seen the first 4 movies plus the Michael Bay remake. And then
Michael Bay remake?
Well, I call it the Michael Bay remake. He didn't direct it, but I believe his company was producing.
Gotcha.
They were producing a whole bunch of these horror franchise reboots. So I've always referred to it as the Michael Bay chainsaw. Not even to say it in a. I guess it kind of sounds like I'm saying it negatively. I actually kind of enjoyed the reboot, and then I also saw what was, I guess, the one right after that, which was a prequel to the reboot.
Oh, yeah. The beginning.
Yeah. So I guess I've technically seen 6 Texas Chainsaw movies.
Okay. Well, what do you think about the other ones? Like what do you think about the first 4? Are any of those worth watching, and how do they stack up against the first one?
So I think the most interesting one to talk about of the sequels is the second one, because it was actually the only other one that was directed by Tobe Hooper, who created this world.
What's funny is IMDb lists it. It lists the first one as a horror, and it lists the second one as a comedy horror.
Yeah, you know what? It's pretty. I mean, maybe horror comedy more. I put the horror part probably above the comedy part.
Okay.
But it definitely is almost a movie that is spoofing the first movie in some ways. It's a weird thing where like Tobe Hooper kind of like, I think he kind of realized that there was no way he was going to be able to top the original movie. So he decided to just go and take it in a completely different direction. It's the only movie in the franchise that has this tone.
Yeah.
All the other movies are like trying to be straight. In fact, most of the other Texas Chainsaw movies feel like soft reboots of the original. Like if you watch the third movie, it more or less is the first movie. If you watch the fourth one, it's again basically the first movie. So the second one is kind of the only one in the franchise that's kind of doing something kind of different, which is kind of neat. A lot of people don't know. You were looking at the posters and admiring them. A lot of people don't know that the poster of the second movie is a recreation of The Breakfast Club.
Oh, okay.
So they're all posed as the Breakfast Club characters. So that's the thing. It's like, yeah, even the poster is like tongue in cheek, and yeah, I don't know. It's none of them hold a candle to the first one.
Yeah, let me ask you, what is it that you really love about the first movie?
It's the tone of it. So there was really a small number of movies that I was kind of banned from seeing when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, these were all the movies that kind of turned out to be like my favorite movies later on.
Mm-hmm.
But one of them was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I mean, basically the rule was in the house was that if the movie disturbed my mom, then I was not allowed to see it.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
But then so when I finally did get to watch it, it was kind of like watching The Exorcist. There was already just so much hype around this forbidden, movie I was going to see.
Well, it makes it that much more exciting when it's forbidden, right?
I mean, it almost, in some ways, almost sets the movie up a little bit for disappointment, because it's like a movie could never really hold up to the way, a parent makes it just seem like it's going to, again, like, that was the movie in their time that was disturbing for them. But, by the time I saw it, it was more than 20 years later. So I just already had seen so many horror movies at that point that, I wasn't too freaked out by it. I just, I don't know, part of me kind of thinks that Tobe Hooper might be a little bit of a hack as a director. I only say that because his career is just so inconsistent. And so I think...
Yeah, it's not like he has this large body of work that's like super classic movies like that first one there.
Yeah, I think it just it was kind of lightning in a bottle, where a lot of the sort of amateur things that were being made in that movie just really happened to complement the sort of documentary, gritty kind of 16 millimeter film that movie has. And I don't know, it's just, to me, there's kind of two movies that kind of changed what the genre of horror became. And they both came out around the same time. And that was like kind of like The Exorcist and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And it just seems like every kind of horror movie that came up before those two movies was just like a different genre of horror. Yeah. And then after Exorcist and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, we just saw this whole new level of extremeness.
Well, and
in movies.
I don't know if there was really this theme of kind of this freak horror genre going on before. Like, what I mean by freak horror is the killer, Leatherface, is just like the biggest murdering psychopathic freak, like he's got a freaking leather face. And he just looks fucking freaky as shit.
Yeah, and you don't know much about him. Like, they never really explain.
Yeah, and that's kind of like a good thing, right?
Yeah.
But then you get the follow-up of, so this came out in 1974. Then you get the follow-up of something like Halloween or Jason or Freddy Krueger, and they're these freaks, right? These freaks who are ugly and scary looking, and their skin is all messed up, and they have a certain creepy look, and you don't know too much about them. They're just kind of these anonymous, emotionless, unexpressive faces that are just hideous and scary.
I remember I used to have like this book of,
well, and that's just what I was going to say is one of the things that I really love about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and that makes it so horrifying is that character and the way that he looks and the way that he is.
I had a few of these old books on classic horror when I was a kid, and because the books were fairly old themselves, I think like the books were published in the 70s, so they were mostly focused on really old horror movies, but they would slowly, near the end of these books, they would kind of catch up to modern horror, which at that time was the 70s. So there, I'd always find like a few pages towards the end that would have like, some black and white photos of Texas Chainsaw. And, just be like
the black and white ones make it look even worse.
Yeah, it really just made it look like really... I used to... when I was younger, I almost used to think that maybe the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was a black and white movie, because I remember the one that we had in our video store, the cover was kind of like a black and white photo. Like it almost looked like a newspaper print article or something. Yeah. And I think, again, that's another thing that made the movie so disturbing that a lot of people don't think about, is the fact that the movie was kind of marketed as if it was a true story. Mm-hmm. And I think that was extra why people like my mom were so disturbed by it, because the second you make it seem like it happened, and it's a very plausible thing. I mean, it wasn't a true story. It was actually inspired by Ed Gein, who was the inspiration for Psycho and a number of other movies. But yeah,
and I mean, Ed Gein, it's interesting because if you know the true story of Ed Gein, he wasn't like a crazy murderer. He was more like a grave robber and a very disturbed person. But I think he maybe killed like one or two people.
Yeah. As far as
And-
we know, it's like maybe a couple of people at most, but not enough to
Yeah.
really be a serial killer.
No, and not in particularly like gruesome ways either. It's more so like what he did with bodies afterwards, and bodies that he dug up from the grave and stuff, right?
Yeah. There's
But it's a
actually
very different kind of thing.
there's I won't go on this for long because this is our slasher list, but there's actually honestly, I think probably the best Ed Gein movie I saw was a little Canadian movie from the 70s called man, I want to say it was called like Demented, maybe something like that. Deranged. And apparently it's the most accurate of the Ed Gein movies.
Okay,
And
that's
Ed Gein-
interesting to know because there's quite a few of them.
Yeah, and it was almost going to be directed by Bob Clark, who directed Black Christmas, and that would have been quite a thing. But funny enough, the guy who plays Ed Gein is the creepy old man neighbor from Home Alone, who Kevin McAllister is terrified of.
Is that right, eh?
So he plays the Ed Gein role, and it's like the movie's almost like a dark comedy in a lot of ways, but it's also like really
I can actually picture
disturbing.
that guy being good in that role.
Yeah,
Take the
it
beard
was a
away and-
surprisingly well done movie. I don't know, maybe we'll talk more about it in one of the other podcasts.
Gotta
But
check that out.
yeah,
Yeah, I'll have to go write that one down on my list too. I was gonna mention something about that.
Or
I
maybe
don't
something
know.
about something else about Texas Chainsaw.
No, it was just specifically about how it was marketed as being a true story, because I think people have debated that. Like when I heard about it, I had to go and look up and try and find out if it was based on a true story and how close to reality it was, because I was also kind of under the impression that it was something that really happened, that there was this freak who actually hacked people up with a chainsaw, and that it was actually quite an accurate representation of what really happened.
Yeah, me
And
too.
when you do get that impression, it's like, wow, that's like some really freaky shit.
Mm-hmm. And they seem to have like even tried to continue this tradition. Even in the reboot, I remember in the Michael Bay movie near the
It was, like,
end,
based
they were
on a
like,
true story.
they were like, we actually have like some of the only real footage of the real Leatherface,
Right,
And it was this like 5 or 10 second grainy, blurry footage of a Leatherface guy kind of popping out of this thing. And I'm just again knowing everything I know about the franchise, I'm just like, this is complete bullshit. but I bet a lot of people in the theater who knew nothing about it probably thought they were watching real footage of the real Leatherface. And for that, but it's just I think it's just a thing. It's a really effective trick. Yeah, if you just want people to be more freaked out by your movie, is just convince people that it's based on a true story, and people will be a lot more freaked out about it. But I think it was mostly done just in like the way like the poster was kind of designed. You know, it was kind of, it had this tagline of kind of like, you know, like the most like horrendous, like, you know, case in American crime history. And, you know, they kind of were trying to make it this exploitation thing as if it was a true story. And then there's a little, you know, at the very beginning of the movie, there's kind of like a little like narration that's, you know, not super common in a lot of horror movies, but it kind of gives it that's, I think, another thing that was put in there to really make it feel like, oh, this was based on something that happened. The other thing I just while we're still talking about that movie is there's so many things I love about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but I love the ending. Like it was just so
him
different at that time.
Swinging that chainsaw around?
Yeah,
Is that
just
what you
like
mean?
just swinging it around over the sunrise, and then it's just a hard cut to the credits, and like it still works. I can't think of anything that would be better than that.
See, it's a really freaky shot, but to me, it's almost a little bit weird that he's just swinging it around and nobody else is there. You know,
yeah,
like it's such a iconic, memorable filming of that action, but it's like it almost would have been better if he was slaying somebody in that.
Well, what's great is also it was, and this is what I mean about how I feel the movie was kind of like a fluke of 100 little wonderful accidents. That's not what the scripted ending was. I don't really know what the scripted ending was. It was probably maybe just meant to be a shot of maybe like the girl screaming in the back of the car that she's driven off in. But it was basically Gunnar Hansen, who played Leatherface. They didn't roll cut, and he didn't know what else to do. So he just improvised a little dance number where he's just swinging around with the chainsaw.
Yeah.
And it was just, again, they just kind of captured it in the moment. And it just made for like the best ending ever. So I just think the movie's filled with a lot of these sort of like little things that just kind of organically happened at the time.
Yeah.
And
that's really quite interesting. I will say one of the things that I maybe don't like about I kind of like this and I kind of don't like it at the same time, is it's almost like too much is shown. In terms of just, you're kind of right there with the family at the dinner table and stuff, and they're talking to the girl and, being like this family of freaks and stuff. And it's almost just too, you know how a lot of movies will shoot things in like dark lighting and use silhouettes and stuff? It almost conceal, like they'll be a little more concealing about stuff, right? I think that in many ways it's cool not to do that, much in the way that, say, The Shining is not. The Shining is partly disturbing because it's not like all shadowy and dark and stuff, right? It's just it's this very creepy hotel, but it looks like an empty hotel, and with the lights on and stuff. And that's kind of the way that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is. Although I would say I think that in some scenes it's almost like you can, so much is sort of revealed that the illusion starts to fade away from me a little bit. So I start to be like, okay, this is a production.
Is there?
Do you feel that way at all about it? Or
I mean, I guess for me, I feel like, is there a particular? Do you feel that it's that kind of starts around the dinner table sequence, or is there a part maybe even before that you feel?
That's what's sticking out in my memory.
Yeah.
I'd have to rewatch it to know for sure. And maybe even just to kind of reevaluate that evaluation, because that was just kind of my impression. I remember when I watched it the first time. I don't know. I never really got a feeling like that scene was like overly lit or exposed exactly. Like it was more, I think like a lot of the things that kind of saved it was like the kind of the 16 millimeter like camera work that just kind of keeps it looking kind of gritty and grainy. Yeah.
It's weird because it's like by the time we get to that part of the movie, this is why I was almost originally questioning whether I was going to put Texas Chainsaw on my list. It is on my list, by the way. It's actually at number 2 for me.
Oh, okay.
I think as we're getting now closer to our list, we're going to start having a lot more similar titles. But I almost wasn't sure about putting it as a slasher because it's like it almost kind of transcends the slasher genre to some degree. Like it kind of starts off, it has a slow start and then it kind of quickly becomes a slasher where they start knocking off characters very quickly. But then when it gets to the final girl, it almost becomes a different kind of horror movie. It almost turns into like a more like torture porn because she's just, she's just going through so much like crap for the rest of the movie. There's like this stuff I always think about where like she manages to escape and then she like manages to find the gas station attendant guy who she thinks is going to help her, only to find out that he's part of the family and he takes her all the way back to the house. And I've seen lots of other horror movies since then that have kind of stolen that kind of gimmick.
Yeah. The person you think is there to help is actually, not your friend.
But yeah, I don't know. One thing I guess like one little trivia thing I know about the movie, because I remember like as I watched the movie more times, I actually started kind of studying it more on like in a cinematic sense. And I was just like, it's actually got some really nice shots in it. And I guess I discovered they had something like, I think they had like 20 feet of dolly track. So they're very quick moments, but you do get to see these like kind of like smooth kind of like panning camera shots a number of times. And like they were able to just kind of like, like make the most of this little track that they had. But what's nice is like, like there's very little like shaky handheld camera stuff. Like it's everything is kind of like, like on a tripod or on a little dolly. And I was just kind of like, oh yeah, like they're definitely, they're not that amateurish. Like they definitely to a degree like knew what they were doing and stuff. But yeah, I don't know. I never, as far as the it's starting to feel more like a production. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I guess the thing is, compared to so many other horror movies I've seen, it just didn't seem like it as much. Like I know that the people who produced Texas Chainsaw Massacre was actually like a porno company, and that's kind of what Texas Chainsaw feels. It's got that exploitation kind of like this almost could turn into a porno movie if people don't start dying. And apparently it was the people who made Deep Throat. They were the ones responsible for producing Texas.
Well, it is maybe a little bit telling how slasher films generally have an element of sexual exploitation and nudity. It's like you're coming for the kills and for the tits, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, there's like that very like famous like kind of low angle butt shot on that girl as she's like approaching the chainsaw house, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's probably the most gratuitous thing in that one movie. Like, there's no real nudity in the first Chainsaw movie, but there's definitely they're definitely banking in on the like, okay, you know, we've got these, you know, cute girls and, you know, short skirts and revealing tops, and if we're not gonna make them naked, let's at least get a few, you know, butt shots in there. It's actually like a great shot. Like, I don't even really think of it as a butt shot. Like, I just think of it as like a really great like kind of horror shot as she's like, you know, approaching this creepy house. But I don't know, I'm not sure if I have too much more to say about it. Was there anything else you want to?
No, we should probably move on from that. That was we covered quite a bit there. Well, I guess I should jump to my number 5. My number 5 is A Nightmare on Elm Street, the first one.
My number 5 is A Nightmare on Elm Street. So
well,
I was waiting for it. Yeah,
right
we're occasionally going to have a syncing up. So
it's almost So there we are. Yeah, well, that's great. We can talk about it. Our shared number 5, Nightmare on Elm Street. For me, one of the big things is just the special effects, how imaginative and creative they are. The concept alone is it's almost like a fantasy film.
Oh, absolutely. You know? No. I wish we had more fantasy slasher horror movies, because overall I think I prefer fantasy horror over slashers. And what's great about Freddy was it was kind of like a melding of the best of both worlds. I mean, I don't know. You could argue that Freddy might be the most iconic 80s horror character.
Yeah, I mean, trying to think who all the contenders would be. Like,
I mean, Jason would be a good challenge to that. But the thing about Jason is like, to me, Jason has a lot of similarities to Michael Myers, while Freddy is so kind of unique. Like everything from the striped sweater, the hat, the glove.
The claw, I know. No, it's probably true. It would be hard to stack something else up against him. From the 80s.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Chucky's fairly iconic, but I don't know if he's quite as iconic as Freddy is.
Yeah,
but,
I don't think he is.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it's I've loved this movie just because it's just a really original take on the sort of like the slasher vibe. I mean, this is another one almost like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where like it's I almost feel like the later Freddys are almost closer to slasher movies, because there's only really a body count of 3, maybe 4 people in this movie. Like, you know, one of them being like a character's mom. So it's like, there's like 3 teenagers who die, but it's paced out pretty well. It's almost like every half an hour there's like a character who dies.
Yeah.
So it's very much more like story driven based.
Well, and in a slasher movie, there needs to be the presence of a slasher, you know, like a person who's doing the slashing, so to speak. And so obviously, like A Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy, like if you've got that character, it kind of needs to be there with the formula, I guess.
Yeah. One thing I think that's really neat for the Freddy movies, especially the first one, is that unlike a lot of other slasher movies, what annoys me with most of them is it's almost like you're watching 2 different movies. You're watching a cheesy teen movie, and then you're also watching a killer movie. And the teen movie is just a generic teen movie where the characters don't even realize they're in a horror movie. let alone know that there's a killer after them. And they don't realize, and then basically like moments before their death, they realize, oh, I'm in a horror movie and I'm now about to die. And that's always just been something that's been really frustrating to me, because you're just watching a lot of these scenes that you're like, this has nothing to do with it. I guess it's.
But isn't a whole bunch of it them talking about how they're afraid to go to sleep and stuff?
Well, that's my point, is that Freddy is the Freddy movies. The characters know who. Well, they might not know exactly who Freddy is, but they're aware of Freddy. Like before even the first character is killed, because they're having nightmares about the guy. So it's not like they're not just in a teen movie. They are aware fairly early on that they're kind of in a horror movie.
Okay.
And so that was the thing I was trying to say was, yeah, with Freddy, it's this thing where they're like, this guy's trying to come after us and kill us in our dreams. We got to do something about it. And I just find a lot more interesting when the characters, know about the killer, kind of throughout it.
Oh,
and they can
I
be
see
more
what you mean.
proactive, as opposed to a movie where just characters just being like, oh, I'm trying to get laid. And who's this guy? And they get killed.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. I didn't realize you were making a comparison to the typical way of doing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're right. They usually don't find out that they're being hunted, so to speak, until they're actually getting killed.
Did you know that Nightmare on Elm Street was actually somewhat based on a true story to a degree, or inspired by a story?
Because I'm curious to what extent.
So there's a few different inspirations. As far as the Freddy character himself, apparently there was a kid who used to bully Wes Craven when he was a kid. And I think his name was Fred Krueger. And then there was also like a creepy, like sort of homeless man who was like kind of strolling through back alleys at night. And again, as a kid, Wes Craven kind of like looked out his window and saw this guy kind of like standing there looking at him. And then like Wes Craven kind of like freaked out, and he kind of like hid away from the window, waited a while, and he was just kind of like, oh, maybe he's gone now. And he like went back to peek. And not only was the guy still there, but he was just like had a huge smile on his face, and he was like directly staring at the kid. And apparently he was kind of dressed like Freddy Krueger. So that's what apparently gave you a little bit of I think he had like the hat and like the sweater.
Yeah.
But the thing that was like the true story incident that kind of inspired the story was in the early 80s, there was a whole bunch of deaths of these like teenagers and young adults, mostly in like Southern Asia. And I don't know if there was actually, I don't think there was like a guy with a claw chasing them or anything, but they knew that there was something that was like kind of after them, where they were aware that they were like, if I fall asleep, I'm going to die. And basically there's just a lot of like similar like aspects of like, the parents kind of, were trying to get the kids to sleep. And then when the kids kind of eventually would crash, the parents would just kind of like, carry them up and put them in bed. And then like later they would just hear a whole bunch of screaming. They'd run back and their kid is dead.
Wow.
And they would, later find like secret coffee pots in their closet that they would like be like making coffee to like keep themselves awake and stuff like that.
Wow,
and so Wes Craven, like he like found all these articles and was just sort of like, oh man, like, well, what if there was like a guy in these dreams who was like coming after you and trying to kill you?
Yeah.
And so he kind of just put all these things together, and that's kind of how like Nightmare on Elm Street happened.
I always love to hear those origin stories, like what your inspiration was for an idea. I think it's just fascinating. If it's for like, how you came up with a song or a novel or a movie or whatever.
Yeah.
Especially when it's something that becomes so culturally substantial and iconic and, lasting the test of time.
Well, I know they made Freddy's sweater like red and green, because apparently those are like just, they're very extreme contrasting colors that your brain almost can't.
I thought it's more like red and gray though, really.
In the movies, or
yeah.
I mean, when I dressed up as Freddy for Halloween, I ended up having to get like a red and gray striped sweater, because that was what was available in like the spirit of Halloween, and I was just like, oh, I guess this will do. But no, it's traditionally it's supposed to be red and green if you have a legit Freddy costume.
Just kind of like a desaturated green, I guess.
Yeah, I think it just in like so many of his scenes, you notice it more in the later movies when Freddy's like in more bright locations.
Yeah, right. In the dark, it's kind of hard.
It does.
To see
It
what
probably
the
looks
color
more
is.
gray than green. Yeah, in when he's like kind of like in the shadows.
Yeah, it depends on the picture.
A lot of people kind of like make fun of him, saying like, "Oh, Freddy's wearing a Christmas sweater."
Yeah, ugly Christmas sweater contest. Hey?
Yeah.
Well, let's see. What's your number 5 then? Oh, you already
We were
said.
both. Yeah. So
you want to
it's
do
official.
number 4?
There's no question. Nightmare on Elm Street is the 5th greatest slasher movie of all time. We can all agree on that.
Yeah. According to us.
My number 4. Well, so my number 4 we've also already discussed, which was Psycho.
Oh, okay. So Psycho is number 4 for you. Yep.
Actually, we've
Fair
discussed we've discussed my number 3 and my number 2.
Okay.
So
we can jump through those. Well, I've got some interesting ones then, because my number 4 is Friday the 13th part. Do you know which one it's going to be?
So you said you've seen the first 6.
I think so. Yeah.
I'm gonna say it's number 6.
No, it's number
Is it
3.
Oh, hey.
Part 3.
It-
So that's the first one where you get the iconic Jason character showing up with the goalie mask and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think it's got some really good sequences, but it's also kind of rooted in the first 2 strongly enough. Like it's basically what those movies are, but with the iconic Jason character. Basically,
Yeah, I love the soundtrack because like
the soundtrack's
all of the
so
other
great.
pretty much every other Jason movie has the classic kind of just violin orchestrated theme, but number 3 they decided to go disco. If you remember, like the opening credits, it's like Friday the 13th. It's Friday the 13th to disco music.
Oh, okay,
not through the rest of the movie. You don't hear it for the rest of the movie,
okay.
but it's just kind of like. It kind of is the way it reveals, like, 'cause the credits kind of come in 3D.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of like, and it's just kind of being like, this ain't your typical Friday the 13th. We're going 3D.
Right. Okay.
I'm actually really glad you, I'm glad that I said 4 and I'm glad you said 3 because the funny thing is that I've always said 4 is the best, unless you're watching number 3 in 3D, in which case it might be the best one because I've actually I got to see Friday the 13th in theaters in 3D, and I don't know, some people kind of rip on the 3D-ness of that movie because usually you're watching it in 2D and you're noticing there's just tons and tons of kind of weird things happening that makes sense if you were watching it in 3D, but in 2D there's just kind of a lot of random things.
Interesting.
But with that being said, that's why I think it's a really good 3D movie because like almost every other scene, they're not just showing you something in 3D, like they're actually trying to think of as many ways to exactly. Yeah. And I don't know, I just remembered like watching it in 3D, like it just looked like a beautiful movie. And I guess it was just because it was in 3D, but just really basic shots that you take for granted. When it's in 3D, it just made it seem like, I don't know, just like this artistic Jason movie. It's hard to describe, but...
well, and that's kind of my impression of it too. And it's... I think it is a pretty good looking movie altogether. That's where sort of the production value is upped a little from the first 2, because the first 2 are kind of on the same level in that they're like these low budget.
Well, they're both,
at least the first.
They're both
summer.
The first 2 are both summer. Like that's kind of how I kind of sometimes categorize. There's different ways I can categorize the Jason movies, but one way is you can also be like there's the summer camp ones, and there's the kind of more like farmhouse ones. And Jason Friday the 13th 3D was the first like farmhouse one. I don't know. Number 4 is also a farmhouse. So yeah, I don't know. I think maybe you and me, maybe we like the farmhouses more than the campgrounds. They get back to the campgrounds in number 6. And I think that then they kind of stay away from it again for a little while. But it's weird. Yeah, we always kind of think of Jason and Camp Crystal Lake, but really a lot of those movies it's just kind of like a rural place in the middle of in the woods, and him just kind of like going after those people. Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun. It's it's the first iconic one where he gets the mask. It's I don't know if anyone has a chance to ever see it in 3D. I'd say do it up because it's definitely, I think, one of the better sort of 3D movies I've ever seen.
Yeah, that's very. I'm wondering where you would like get to see that.
Well, this was when I was in Toronto. It was just one of like the festival theaters, and
Oh,
it was in the month of October. In fact, I might have
Yeah.
even have seen it on Halloween night, or
Okay,
maybe
awesome.
October 30th or something. But
that'd be
it was really
sweet.
close to Halloween.
That'd be
Yeah.
really cool. All right, well, so let's go into our number threes then. You said that your number three was
My number 3 was Black Christmas.
Right. Okay. So mine is Halloween 2,
Nice.
and
Now, how many of the Halloween movies have you seen?
again, I think I've seen. I'm a little bit. Again, with some of these movies, it's like
It's a rough franchise. As much as I love it, it's,
yeah.
it's a
Well,
mess.
and it's a little bit maybe some of them blur together. So I'll think I've seen certain ones, but I'm actually thinking of other ones.
Mhm.
I think maybe the first. See, because when you were telling me about how number 3 doesn't have Michael Myers, I'm like, did I even watch that? Because I might have watched it and then been like, where the fuck is Michael Myers?
Right. Yeah.
But then totally forgot about it because it was just so not Halloween.
Mhm.
But I think I've at least seen the fourth one.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm just having a hard time recollecting exactly what it's like. But I know the first two quite.
Yeah. Like I find 1 and 2 are very much linked together. 4 and 5 are very much linked together. 6 is even kind of, I guess 6 has to kind of by default be linked with 4 and 5. And then after that, it just becomes a series of reboots and remakes and and it just gets kind of really goofy after that. But the second one is like I like how the second one really blends with the first one. Like, I mean, that one, it's the same. It's all in one night. Yeah.
They're so similar, right? And so that's where they're kind of like neck and neck for me. And it's like, which one am I going to put higher than the other? But to me, these are just the quintessential slasher films in that it kind of has everything that I look for. They're from the right era, late 70s, early 80s. They have that creepy vibe, or probably they're both from the late 70s, right?
Oh, the second one is actually early 80s.
Like 1980 or something, yeah.
Yeah. But
yeah, they've got that creepy autumn vibe. I love the music so much. That theme is just like, as soon as I hear it, it just triggers kind of Halloween vibes.
Yeah,
I don't know what else to say.
even though like the majority of it takes place in a hospital, for some reason that works. I don't know. For some reason, it's like, yeah, Michael Myers in a hospital works for me.
Yeah.
And it's a hospital like late at night. It's a very kind of empty, spooky hospital.
Yeah.
Having kind of Michael Myers there. It's, yeah, I mean, like, yeah, like you don't have to, like, I wouldn't want more hospital Michael Myers movies because it's like, we got it in number 2, but
Yeah.
yeah. What do you think about the, because there's a lot of kind of, if there's any controversy about the second one, is that's kind of where some people kind of fault it for pushing more Michael Myers' origin. There's more things revealed about the story that some people feel is either a bit forced, or it kind of makes him less scary because it kind of gives him more motive.
To be honest, I mean, that's why it ranks lower than the first one for me. And I'm going to say like one of my next 2 movies is the first one.
Yeah.
And it's also for that setting thing, right? Like, I don't like the hospital setting as much as the neighborhood street and the babysitter across the street in the house, which is like just so classic to me.
Yeah.
And kind of what I really look for and like about these kinds of movies, like people being terrorized in a neighborhood.
Yeah.
So I do tend to agree that, and I was actually thinking this a little bit earlier. What's so interesting about these slasher characters is that it's like the less you know about them, the more fascinating they are.
Yeah.
Isn't that strange?
There was nothing better than when I was just looking in the horror section of a video store, looking at all these covers, not seeing a single one of the movies, and having to just look at the backs of the covers and the front covers and try to kind of figure out what actually like happens in these movies, I think almost for every one of those horror movies, whether it was like Michael Myers or Freddy or whatever, I think in my own imagination, I made all of the movies out to be much scarier than they actually were. Well,
and where this comes from is probably, and so I don't know if other people would agree with me when I say that, like, the idea that with these characters, The less you know about them, the more fascinating they are. But maybe so maybe people won't agree, but I personally think that is the case, and it probably particularly applies to maybe villains of this nature, and it's probably that fear of the unknown kind of thing. If you understand something, then it's less scary.
Yeah.
But if you don't understand it, or you don't know much about it, then it can really freak you out. And who are these guys? They're just these faceless, deadpan, lumbering, psychopathic killers who are on a rampage, and they're here to do you harm. And you don't know, you can't reason with them.
Yeah.
You can't stop and have a conversation and try to talk them out of doing what they're doing. They're just
and the mask is scarier than the real face.
Oh yeah, exactly, right. And I think there's a lot to be said for that expressionless thing, because you can't read them.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with Valentine. It's the same thing with Jason, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Leatherface. I mean, Shredder even. There's just something that's quite intimidating about an expressionless, deadpan face that you can't get a read on. And so that's kind of an interesting insight to. And also
observe. the sort of the black eyes from the shadow being cast. That's the thing is we when you can't see someone's eyes, that's an evolutionary trait. That's why we have the whites.
And that's one of the problems that I have with Friday the 13th Part 2 is you can see his one eye through that pillowcase.
Yeah.
And it's that's not scary.
No.
I don't want to see his eyes.
I'd almost prefer if there was two eye holes, but they were both shrouded in shadows.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Just give him a KKK hoodie, that would have been probably scarier.
Yeah.
I try. I try hard to try to accept that burlap sack or pillowcase, whatever that thing is that Jason has on his head in the second one, and
well, and that's just it. Where it's actually more effective in the first one, not seeing him and not knowing anything. What is hilarious about the first one is it's clearly these man hands. Whenever you see his hands, it's clearly these man hands, but then you're supposed to believe that it's this old lady.
That's right.
It's okay, whatever.
Can you imagine? I mean, obviously they were for the third movie, they're okay, we gotta change this out. We need a new mask. But I mean, imagine if they didn't. Imagine if we just had this crazy franchise of 12 movies, 12 movies of pillowcase head, you know. Every Halloween, there's just kids dressed up with a pillowcase on their head.
It would not have been nearly as big as it was, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, they definitely made the right call with the hockey mask. It's just such a...
Yeah, it just ruined hockey masks forever, because they never use those anymore.
Do you think that the inspiration for the Jason hockey mask could have come from Lord Humongous from the Road Warrior? Because that came out just a year before the Friday the 13th hockey mask Jason.
That's plausible.
Because that's the only.
I don't know that it would have been a conscious thing.
It's just the only other thing I could think of that kind of just had referenced kind of a villain in a hockey mask.
Yeah.
So
well, I'd be really curious to find out what gave them that idea. Because it is a scary mask. I mean, I remember seeing this commercial back in the day with some hockey goalie and seeing him wearing that mask. Frankly, I just think it's a scary mask.
Yeah, it was. General. It's in that particular, I'm not the biggest hockey expert, but I do know kind of when it came to goalie masks, that was just something that was just very quickly evolving. And so there was probably only a very brief window in time where that kind of a mask was the goalie mask before it evolved into something that looked very different from the Jason mask. Yeah. But it was just that was the right mask at the right time for them to be let's put that on our killer. I don't know if some of the other hockey masks would have worked the way that particular one does, just with the holes in it and everything. If you put somebody in a modern day goalie mask today, it wouldn't look scary at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it's just like a helmet with a cage.
In front
of it thing, right. Yeah. I don't know. It's just freaky.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at an image of them right now.
So
it's just, I don't know.
It's something about, scary. just a white face with black eyes.
Yeah,
you know,
and all those holes all over it. Maybe it's
yeah.
what is it? Is that like trypophobia? I think.
Oh yeah. The whole
Fear of holes.
fear. Yeah. So was that your number 2 title, or was that your number 3?
That was my number 3.
Okay.
Halloween 2. So number 2 is.
I think I know what I think I know what your
Do I
last 2
guess?
are. Well, you haven't said I know what you did last summer yet.
Okay, that's
So-
not on the list.
Oh,
actually.
it's not. Oh,
No,
okay.
no.
I thought maybe that was going to just be like a kind of like a guilty pleasure one or something. Well, now okay, so now I'm really not sure. I know what one of the 2 movies is for sure, but that still leaves the other title that I'm just Shredder Part 2.
Well, the good thing is this one is one that we haven't talked about yet. And no, not Shredder Part 2. But this is one that we haven't talked about yet, and it's one that I didn't think of as an obvious thing. And I mean, you know, we can kind of debate whether or not it's a slasher film.
Okay.
I think it quite clearly is, but it's maybe not in the same sense. Anyway, what it is From Hell. From
Right.
Hell. What was that, like late 90s, early 2000s?
I want to say it was.
think?
I'm going to say maybe like 2000. It seems like it was almost like a year or so after Sleepy Hollow. So I'm going to say
Yeah.
like 2000 or 2001.
Yeah.
Um,
And so like I hadn't thought to talk about it earlier, but it's again, I think one of the reasons I love it so much is it crosses over with the gothic horror genre, which I absolutely love. I just love period films in general, and I love the aesthetic. I love the atmosphere. I think it's a super creepy movie, but it's also got this mystery element, kind of the whodunit thing. Great costumes, great production design. Just a super well-made movie all around.
yeah.
And
Well, based on
really
a
interesting.
really classic graphic novel. I don't know if you're
Oh
familiar,
yes,
but it's
I did hear that this.
it's
is what I-
an Alan Moore
that's right.
comic
yeah.
strip. So I mean, yeah, they had some great material to work with, and actually, from what I hear the graphic novel is even a lot more brutal than the movie.
Yeah, I could imagine.
But no, I think it's really good that we have a Jack the Ripper movie on the list, because if you kind of think about it, isn't kind of Jack the Ripper kind of considered maybe like the first kind of documented serial killer? I mean, there's
think
obviously
so.
been great leaders and stuff before that who have been responsible for just killing people, but not like in a
Yeah.
not in a way where it's like someone's just kind of like stalking just kind of stalking like random victims, for some
yeah.
personal reasons and stuff.
Yeah.
I can't really think
Like
of
I
anyone
would think,
before him.
I don't know when he was around or when he was committing his killings. but,
Late 1800s, kind of around the
Oh,
period of
okay.
like Dracula, but
Well,
it would be like
then-
late 1800s.
H.H. Holmes was like H.H. Holmes was killing people back in the mid 1800s or something.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember when that was. Chicago World's Fair. But he must have been before.
Was he
Jack the
killing
Ripper, I
like
think.
for like was he killing to like rob them or
Well,
something?
he was
or
doing a lot
it
of like it was
uh,
a lot of things. He was doing some scientific experiments for one thing.
okay.
He was doing all kinds of shit. Like it's a fascinating life story, very disturbing too. But I don't know what he was like psychopathic. Obviously.
Right. Yeah.
He basically he journaled quite a lot, as I recall, and he was documenting how he like burned some guy to death, and the guy was screaming out in pain or whatever, and he just didn't feel a thing, right? So I think
Mhm.
one of the things that he was doing was he was experimenting and testing out his own like emotional response and kind of like trying to understand his own psyche in a way, But also he was doing it as a business because he would sell body parts and bones and things like that.
Where's that guy's horror movie?
I know. So
I'd watch that.
This
yeah.
was Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio were going to team up to do Devil in the White City. You remember hearing about that? Like, so
I remember hearing that title, but I didn't know anything about what it was about.
Yeah. So Devil in the White City is apparently this novel. I haven't read it, but a novel about H.H. Holmes committing his crimes during the Chicago World's Fair back in the 1800s. And so it was announced that Scorsese was going to direct this movie and Leonardo DiCaprio was going to play H.H. Holmes, which is great because he was a good-looking, charismatic fellow, sort of Ted Bundy-ish in the sense that he was very good at charming people, and he like ran a hotel, and used to put his victims in a room, and then he would like gas them, and then have these secret passageways, I think. But it's and that's a totally true story. It's not fictional at all.
And yet it sounds like something out of a movie. It sounds so elaborate.
That's just it, right? It's kind of like what the horror of thinking Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a true story. This actually was a true story.
Yeah. Well, I hope there's still a possibility of them doing that movie down the road.
Yeah, I know. I was so excited.
Do you know why that fell through? Was it maybe just too dark for Hollywood to greenlight or something?
I didn't hear anything about why it didn't go through, but I heard that they were going to do it, and then it just sort of seemed to fade away.
Because we never really gotten a truly like psychotic killer DiCaprio character. I mean, the closest thing would be like Django Unchained. But DiCaprio was originally supposed to be American Psycho, so this could have been the nice sort of follow through of him playing, a real psycho killer. Because I think at the age of DiCaprio where he's at now in his life, that'd be better than ever. I don't know, like maybe if it was like 10 or so years ago, I'd maybe have a harder time buying him as that, but now he's getting kind of grizzled,
Yeah, although I think H.H. Holmes was actually in his 30s or something when he was doing this.
You just have to lose a bit of weight. I don't think it would take much for DiCaprio to get the.
Yeah, no, I'm sure he could pull it off. I imagine. Yeah, I think he'd be great at it, to be honest.
Yeah,
and also Scorsese would probably be an awesome director for it.
He was considered probably like a handsome man for like the 1800s, which is probably a little bit lower standards than of now. But I'd love to see that movie. I wish Scorsese made more thrillers and horrors, because the ones that he's made are quite good, I think. But I guess moving on, just continuing on with the list. Are we at the number ones?
Yeah. Well, what's your number two again? Your number two.
My number two is Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Okay. Right. Okay. Yeah. So that's pretty high on the list for you.
So I think we have the same number one, though.
Okay. Well, is it? Let's say it together. 3, 2, 1.
Halloween!
Terror
Train.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah. No, it's Halloween. It's Halloween.
Okay. It's like, haven't even heard of Terror Train.
It almost made my top 10. It's one of the Jamie Lee Curtis slashers that isn't Halloween. It's a fun one, but it's no Halloween. Yeah, no Halloween. This is the one where it's like, to me, it's like, I don't know. This is like even like every like shot of this movie, I just love for some reason. Like I almost, as much as I love Michael Myers, I actually think the star of Halloween is the cinematography, the camera work. It's really like the main character, I find, where
and it's got so many of those just still compositions, just like a still shot.
Yeah. Well, and then he was the cinematographer for the first two movies. Dean Cundey went on to become a very successful Hollywood cinematographer. I mean, he ended up working with Spielberg, because Spielberg was, again, like loving his early John Carpenter work. So I mean, like Dean Cundey later like shot Jurassic Park, for example. He's definitely gone on to really big things. But I mean, yeah, you see the talent early on, because
he must have been pretty young when he did Halloween then.
Well, John Carpenter was still in his John Carpenter himself was in his late 20s, so I wouldn't be surprised if Dean Cundey was around the same age. Like, part of what I love so much about Halloween was just how simple and low budget it was.
Well, exactly, yeah. And I mean, Halloween, I remember watching that Netflix series, the movies that made us.
Yeah.
And I watched the Halloween episode. I watched the Friday the 13th one. It's like how simple and low budget these movies were, but how they were these big box office surprises too.
Yeah.
And that's really cool.
Yeah. Halloween for its time was the most successful independent movie of all time when it came out.
Yeah, crazy.
Which is the reason why the crazy 80s slashers was what it was. It was, you can make the comparison to what the Blair Witch Project did, which is then we had all these found footage horror movies for like the next decade or so. So
Makes
all of these 80s movies were being like, did you remember what Halloween did? Like, let's do that. Even if we can't be as good, we can make something even cheaper. And, even if it gets like half of the success, it's a good deal. It's like, it's almost like, it's not that Halloween invented the slasher genre, but it it's like it perfected it to the point that it created the blueprint for other people to be like, oh, okay, that's how to do it.
Yeah, right,
and,
right.
Obviously, they didn't follow the blueprint well because so many of them are terrible. But they were kind of like, okay, yeah, like that's kind of how you do a slasher movie.
Well, this is the thing, right? Is that there's maybe some subtlety that it's like it's not as easy as it looks to do a really good one.
Yeah.
And to have it be like to make it where you actually take it seriously and can get invested in it and get invested in the characters and stuff. Because, you know, say comparing to my number 10, Shredder, it's so easy for a movie like this to kind of slip into comedic territory.
Yeah.
Because you just don't take it seriously, or it's unbelievable or whatever. And it's like, yeah, slasher movie, the concept is in many ways not that believable, but and especially there's a part of you that would even maybe wonder what's scary about a guy walking around in a mask. But again, it kind of goes back to that thing we talked about where it's actually that fear of the unknown or what you don't understand and stuff. There's a lot of scary things going on there, and it is a testament to how well that movie is made and how well that story is told cinematically.
Yeah.
And all those elements coming together, you know, again, I always like to reference the music because I think the music is just spot on and super memorable. And
one of the best horror themes clearly ever. And apparently that was...
And it's not even just that theme, but like other music that's in there.
Oh, it's
like,
all great. Yeah.
You remember like a year ago or maybe 2 years ago, you and I were driving around on Halloween night and we just put the soundtrack on.
Yeah.
And we were listening to all the stuff that's not the main theme. And it's like, oh, fuck yeah.
I almost prefer that music because it hasn't been overkilled to death the way the main theme has. But that main theme was apparently just a piano exercise that his piano teachers made him do when he was a kid. Mm-hmm. And that's all it was. And I think maybe he changed the tempo or maybe he changed the key. But just like that, it was just this little exercise that he turned.
That makes a lot of sense because he is just kind of working his way down a scale.
Yeah. Well, what really makes it work is the bass keys where he's just like, So it's and that was the thing.
It's there's so much like doom and dread in that.
Yeah.
The one thing about it is
and I think he made it pretty quickly. Like it wasn't like, oh, I've got this vision of a soundtrack. It was kind of like he was on a tight budget and he was just like, okay, I got my synthesizer. I got a few days to crank out some stuff. Yeah. And it all became I think it's definitely the best music of his career because he's done the music for most of his movies. And as much as a lot of the other stuff is good, nothing is as iconic as the Halloween music.
Yeah, well, and it's funny too because like one of the things that actually kind of makes me laugh when I watch the movie is just how every time somebody gets killed, it's like that music just recurs again.
Yeah,
it's just like and you get it again, and it gets pretty repetitive throughout the movie. But I don't know. It's a welcomed reprisal.
Yeah.
You know?
It was interesting when you were saying the thing about how, it's even like, with all things considered, like, you're not really like laughing at the movie. Like there's not that many things that kind of come off like cheesy, even way later. If there's anything maybe that's unrealistic is just the fact that like he keeps kind of getting like harmed and then kind of keeps just coming back to life for more.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that's great. Like that's part of what makes him scarier. And at that time, I don't think that was as much of a cliche as it became later on with movies. But the funny thing is that, right, like in many ways, Exorcist is probably considered the scarier movie than Halloween, but you show a lot of people The Exorcist today and it actually gets a lot of people laughing. And I think it's usually because of the language. When you see Reagan just, just saying like the filthy stuff she says, people just find it funny. And there's not really something like that for Halloween. I can't really like if you're maybe laughing at a character, you're maybe laughing at like a stupid teenager's dialogue maybe, but not, I can't really think of that much where you're laughing at Michael Myers himself. That first movie, he's not even Michael Myers in the first one. He's basically like, he's Michael Myers, but he's basically credited as the Shape.
Oh yeah,
because he's like the Where's Waldo of slasher killers.
Yeah,
like I'd seen that movie so many times, and I remember after like so many viewings, I would still sometimes just start spotting him and noticing him in the background of shots that I never noticed before. And he's just, that's the thing, is like most of the movie is just him waiting, like like stalking and waiting to make his move. And that's what's so creepy, is like the first movie is the one that he seems the smartest. Like he's actually, he is thinking, like he's got a plan.
Well, and that's also the thing that makes this slow walking, lumbering around, like there's so much confidence in his movement, and that he doesn't have to run after somebody. He can walk after them because he's confident in what he's doing, and he knows it's like the subconscious effect that you get from seeing the character move like that is that they're confident at what they're doing, and they're in control of the situation.
Yeah.
It's kind of like I would actually make a lot of comparisons, say, to the way that Darth Vader is depicted, right? He isn't usually freaking out and losing his temper and stuff.
They definitely have the same breathing.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, in many ways, Darth Vader's got a lot of similarities with Michael Myers. Like, again, it's that expressionless mask face that you can't get a read on, right?
It's almost like Michael's the yin to Darth Vader's yang, like the white to the black mask.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, continue.
Well, it's just it's just that whole idea of when you're in pursuit of your victims and you don't have to chase after them. It's kind of like you're just walking after them because you know you've kind of got them in your trap already.
Yeah.
I don't know, something scary about that. So anyway, Halloween, number 1.
Yeah.
Isn't that cool? So we share the same number 1, and we share the same number 5.
There was one little thing I also want to just mention quickly that maybe you know about or maybe you don't, but are you aware of the connections with Psycho and Halloween?
I don't think so.
So the thing that's really neat about this is that it's kind of like, Psycho started off the slasher genre, and it's almost like I don't know if John Carpenter knew the effect of, like, I don't know how he could have predicted the success of Halloween, but it was almost like he was like being like, oh, we're going to have Psycho kind of pass the baton over to us as the next big game changer in the slasher genre, which is exactly what happened. But for example, Jamie Lee Curtis is the daughter of Vivian Lee. And that wasn't accidental. Like, John Carpenter was very aware that, this is a great marketing strategy that I can cast the daughter of Vivian Lee in my own slasher movie. And so there's that little bit. Another little interesting connection is that, Dr. Loomis, who's played by Donald Pleasance, who's the psychiatrist of Michael Myers. So Dr. Loomis's full name is actually Sam Loomis. Sam Loomis is also the name of the man in Psycho who later shows up. Not Norman Bates, but there's another male character who, I don't know if the female character is Marion Crane. I don't know why that's popping into my head. But there's a guy, there's the sister of Vivian Lee who shows up because she wants to investigate her missing sister, and she meets this guy who helps her, and they both go to the Bates Motel, and he's there like pretty much to the end. But the question is it the same Sam Loomis? Did the Sam Loomis from Psycho grow maybe from that traumatic experience? Did he end up becoming a doctor of psychiatry and then later ended up dealing with the patient of Michael Myers? Right.
Like, did the ages line up, and did they use the same actor?
They definitely didn't use Donald Pleasance. But okay, let's say he was 30. Let's say he was 30 in Psycho. If Sam Loomis would be 48 in Halloween, it's a little bit of a rough. Maybe the Donald Pleasance Sam Loomis maybe drank a bit too much and was a chain smoker. But maybe for 1978, you could believe Donald Pleasance is 48. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know, but I do not believe that it was a coincidence. I think it was an homage that John Carpenter was giving to from Psycho to kind of put into his own movie. But I mean, I don't know, maybe it created some neat little karma because it really did kind of become a passing of baton. Like it really was. Halloween probably was the most important slasher movie up until besides Psycho before that. So anyways, yeah, there's probably even a couple of other little Psycho references, but those are the two that I specifically remember.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's very interesting to hear. All right, well, that's our top 10.
You know, who knows? I mean, we could, maybe some of these topics are worth even like a 2-parter. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's tons of more things we could say about the slasher movies, but
yeah, there
maybe,
might be more to say one day, and
we could always go
we'll
back.
think of something.
Yeah.
But I think we did
or maybe
cover
we'll
quite a bit of
go
stuff.
back and we'll later focus on maybe like specific slashers or something, and just go more in depth on particular franchises or something.
Well, and
But,
likewise too, I'm sure we're gonna have thousands of comments on these posts and whatnot. So, like, you know, from everybody who's listening, you know, again, the hundreds of thousands,
all
millions
of
of people,
our
who are
vivacious, hysterical fans, like, please, like, comment and tell, you know, things that maybe we missed or things you'd like to hear us talk about next time. You know, let us know, and we will hopefully
bring them up.
dive into that next time.
Shout you out.
Yeah.
If we get an idea from you, we will shout you out and give you our deep gratitude. Oh, it's the midnight toll rings, ladies and gentlemen. My midnight alarm.
I guess.
Anyway,
I guess until next time.
yeah, we'll wrap it up, and we're gonna have more episodes of these. Thank you for joining us. We hope that you'll drop in.
This was
again
our first
another
show,
time.
guys. So yeah, it'll only get better from here. But hopefully you enjoyed it, and
we will talk to you next time. This is Kevin Rosmer and
Oliver Drawson
checking in, dropping out. We will talk to you later, and everybody have a good night.